What if none of this was real? Not in the way you've always believed. Not the walls around you, not the ground beneath your feet, not the clouds above your head or the ticking of the clock, not the job you go to or the name you answer to, or even the memories you've carried for as long as you can remember. What if life, as you've come to know it, was never meant to be the whole story? What if it was only a test? Not a test you can fail, not one meant to grade you or punish you or keep you small, but a test designed to reveal, to illuminate, to soften the parts of you that have grown stiff from trying so hard to be certain. What if every moment of confusion, every heartbreak, every strange coincidence was placed exactly where it needed to be, not to trap you but to wake you, to whisper beneath the noise of everyday life, this isn't all there is. There's more, so much more, if you're willing to look beyond. Imagine now, just for a while, that you are not who you think you are, that behind your thoughts, your memories, your personality is something far older, something timeless, something that cannot be broken, something that chose to be here, not by accident, not by force, but willingly, lovingly, knowing what it would mean to forget. You agreed to the rules of this place, to be born without remembering where you came from, to grow up believing the world was solid, predictable, knowable, to believe that this identity you wear is the only version of you that has ever existed. But beneath all that, behind your eyes, in the still space between heartbeats, there is a part of you that never forgot. And it's that part, that quiet watcher, that's beginning to stir. It starts small, maybe with a question that appears one night while you're brushing your teeth, or a strange déjà vu that lingers longer than it should. Maybe it sits a dream you wake from in. What if none of this was quite what it seems? Not the ground beneath your feet, not the passing of time, not even the thoughts you think are your own. What if the sun rising, the seasons changing, the ticking of the clock on your wall were all parts of something larger, something hidden beneath the surface of what we call reality? What if every moment of joy, every moment of sorrow, every strange coincidence, every impossible dream, every quiet moment alone in the dark was not random at all, but a carefully placed step, part of a quiet, ancient test you agreed to take, long before you ever opened your eyes for the first time? You might not remember it, almost no one does, but somewhere beyond the boundary of this life, before the name you were given, before the first cry you ever made, before the room you were born into, and the people you would come to love and lose, somewhere before all of that, you said yes. Yes to the forgetting. Yes to the not knowing. Yes to the veil. And yes to the test. Not a test with right answers and wrong answers. Not a test with grades or judges or finish lines. Not the kind of test that punishes or rewards in ways we can measure. This test was something else, something gentler, something much, much deeper. It was not about being perfect. It was about being present. Not about getting it right, but about discovering who you really are when everything else is stripped away. When you've forgotten everything except the quiet, knowing that still lives inside you. The knowing that whispers, softly, always, there is more than this. You are more than this. And so you came. Through whatever doorway souls pass through, whatever mystery lies between worlds. You entered this life, this body, this time, this place. You opened your eyes. You took your first breath, and in doing so you passed through the first gate of the test, the veil of forgetting. It closed gently behind you, not to trap you, but to allow you to experience this world fully. Because if you remembered everything, if you knew from the beginning that this was just a test, then none of it would feel real. The tears wouldn't set matter. The joy wouldn't set be as sharp. The mistakes wouldn't set change you. The longing wouldn't sit ache. And without all that, you would learn nothing. Because the test isn't set about facts. It sits not about knowledge. It sets about becoming. About remembering not with your mind but with your heart, your choices, your presence. The test is woven into every part of your life. It sits in the people you meet. The ones you love, the ones who hurt you, the ones who disappear. It's in the decisions you make when no one is watching. It sits in how you treat yourself when you fail. It sits in how you speak to strangers, in how you forgive, in how you begin again, even when everything inside you wants to give up. It sits easy to miss it. That sits part of the design. The world is loud. It pulls you in 1,000 directions. It tells you what matters. It tells you who you are. It tells you what success looks like, what love should feel like, what you should fear, what you should want. The world is convincing. It builds stories so detailed, so immersive, that you can spend entire lifetimes forgetting you're inside one. And yet, the test never forgets you. It waits. It whispers. It leaves clues. Sometimes in dreams. Sometimes in the eyes of a stranger who feels familiar. Sometimes in the aching beauty of a sunset that feels too perfect to be random. Sometimes in the way your heart shatters open when you lose something you thought you couldn't live without. Sometimes in silence. Always in love. Love is the most powerful signal the test uses, because love cannot be faked. You can chase it. You can try to control it. You can mistake it for other things. But real love, the kind that breaks you and remakes you and teaches you things you didn't know you needed to learn, that kind of love is never random. It is placed, carefully, like a note hidden in a drawer, meant to be found at just the right moment. And when it comes, the test becomes more visible. Because love demands truth. It reveals the stories we tell ourselves, the armor we wear, the wounds we carry. It holds up a mirror. And in that mirror, if we're willing to look, we begin to see the test more clearly. We begin to see ourselves. Not the version of ourselves we perform for others. Not the one we polish and protect and promote. The real one. The one beneath the stories. The one who is still connected to the place we came from. The place we return to. The place that is always whispering, even now, even here, in the middle of the night, that you are not lost. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are exactly where you need to be. There is a reason you simply hearing this now. Maybe it sets the rhythm of the words. Maybe it's the way they echo something you've always felt but could never quite name. Maybe it's because something in you has always wondered if there was more. And now, just maybe, you're beginning to remember that there is. The test doesn't require belief. It doesn't ask you to prove anything. It only asks you to be honest with yourself, with others, with the moments that matter. Especially the ones that seem small. Because those are the moments where transformation begins. In the kindness you give when you sip tired. In the patience you offer when it costs you. In the silence you hold instead of speaking harm. In the joy you allow yourself to feel, even when the world tells you it's not the time. The test lives in those moments. It waits in the pauses. It sings in the quiet. It's in the question that rises inside you after you've been hurt. Will I become harder or softer? Will I close my heart or leave it open? Will I armor up or stay human? These are not small decisions. They shape you, not just for this life, but beyond. Because who you become here matters there. We don't know exactly what sits beyond this life. Maybe no one does. But if this is a test, then what comes after is not an ending. It's a return, a homecoming. And who you are when you arrive is shaped by every choice you made while you were here. And if you've made mistakes, and you will, you haven't failed. The test doesn't punish you for stumbling. It honors the way you get back up. It celebrates the moment you realize you want to be better, even if you don't know how. The test isn't set looking for perfection. It sits looking for presence, intention, integrity, growth. You may never know how many lives you have touched, how many people felt seen because of something you said or didn't say at all. The test keeps track of those things, not to reward you, but because they matter, because they shape the world you walk through, and the people who walk with you, and you stir not alone, even when it feels like you are, even when the night is long, and your heart is heavy and your thoughts are too loud to bear. You stir not alone. There are others in the test with you. Some you sev met, some you sip loved, some you sieve lost, some are yet to come, and some are not visible at all. There are moments when you feel them, in the stillness, in the in-between, the spaces where time feels like it slows, and everything becomes quiet and wide. Those are the moments the veil gets thinner, the moments the remembering begins. And maybe this is one of those moments. Maybe you're remembering, not with your mind, but with your soul. Maybe you've always known on some level that there was more, that life was not just a series of random events, that your pain was not meaningless, that your longing was not empty, that the beauty you've glimpsed, the awe you've felt, the love you've given, that all of it was part of something, not just your life, but the life beneath it. And now, as you lie here, as your breath softens, as your body grows still, let yourself rest inside that possibility. Let yourself drift into the idea that this world is not the whole of it, that you are not just flesh and bone and name and history, but something deeper, something luminous, something sacred. Let yourself remember without needing to understand. Let yourself feel without needing to explain. Let yourself be without needing to prove anything. You are here, and that is enough. You are in the test, and you are doing better than you think. The forgetting was part of the agreement. The remembering is the gift. And this moment of pause, of quiet, of soft wondering, is not outside the test. It is the test. You are not failing. You are unfolding. Just keep breathing, keep choosing, keep becoming. And when the morning comes or when the dream begins, you will carry a little more of the remembering with you. Even if you forget again, even if the veil returns, you will know deep down that there is more, that you are more, and that this life is not all there is. It is only a test. But oh, what a beautiful one it is. The forgetting is not a flaw. It is the beginning. It is the fog that falls gently over the soul as it enters this world, wrapping it in a soft veil so thick that even the memory of what came before fades like a dream at dawn. The moment you are born, the forgetting begins. Not all at once, but gradually, like a candle dimming in a sunlit room, until the light it gives is almost invisible. And yet, even in the deepest forgetting, something remains, a trace, a thread, a feeling that there is more. You felt it once, though maybe you didn't know what it was. Maybe it came to you as a child, in the moments between waking and sleep, when your mind was still open and soft and the world hadn't yet fully shaped your beliefs. Maybe it came when you stared up at the sky and felt something vast pressing down, not in fear but in wonder. Or when you were alone in a room and suddenly felt you weren't alone at all. Or when a sound or a scent brought a wave of sadness that didn't belong to anything you could name. That was the remembering trying to reach you. But the forgetting, it is strong, and it needs to be. Because this test only works if you truly believe it's real. You have to feel the ache of it, the weight, the beauty, the confusion. You have to feel what it sits like to lose, to fall, to yearn. You have to forget the safety you came from, in order to remember what it means to choose love in a place where love is not always returned, to choose hope in a world that sometimes offers only despair, to choose kindness when cruelty might serve you better. The forgetting protects the test. It keeps the stakes high. It keeps you engaged. It makes the smallest acts of compassion sacred because you give them without knowing the whole story, because you don't remember why you're here, only that something in you aches for truth, for connection, for something that feels real. And so you begin to search, not always with intention, often just by living, by feeling your way through the dark, by touching and tasting and stumbling forward with no map. You build your identity from what the world offers you: names, labels, expectations. You do what you sit told. You follow the rules. You try to fit in. But somewhere beneath all of that, a quiet restlessness grows. Because the forgetting cannot erase the thread completely. It tugs at you. Gently at first, then stronger. It shows up as dissatisfaction with things that seem fine on the surface. It shows up as a sense of distance between who you are and who you feel you could be. It shows up as curiosity, or longing, or that strange emptiness that nothing seems to fill. The world tells you to ignore it, to stay busy, to numb the ache, to fill the silence with noise. But the silence is where the remembering begins. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring it forward. A loss, a betrayal, an illness, a failure. Something that shakes the world you've built and cracks it open. Through the crack, light. And through the light, a question. What if this isn't set all there is? You may not say it out loud. You may not even form it into words. But something inside you begins to turn, to wonder, to open. And once it opens, it cannot close the same way. You start to see signs, strange patterns, coincidences too perfect to be chance, dreams that feel like messages, encounters that feel like meetings arranged long ago. You begin to feel watched, not in fear, but with care. You begin to suspect that maybe, just maybe, you're not alone. And still, the forgetting pulls at you. It sits heavy, familiar. It wants you to return to what sips known, to what sips easy, to what sips expected. But you sib changed. Even if you don't sit show it yet, even if no one else sees it. Inside, something has shifted. A door has opened. And behind that door is everything you've forgotten, waiting for you to remember. Not all at once, but in pieces. In quiet ways. Through tears you didn't just expect. Through memories that come uninvited. Through moments of peace so deep you almost forget to breathe. And the world continues on. The test continues on. You are not given a guidebook. You are not handed the answers. That sip's not how the test works. You are asked to live the questions, to trust the unfolding, to choose not what is easy, but what feels aligned even when you can't explain why. Sometimes the remembering comes through people. You meet someone and feel like you've known them forever. They say something that resonates so deeply you feel your whole body respond. You feel seen, known, recognized. And even if the moment is brief, it changes you. It reminds you. Other times the remembering comes through solitude, through long walks, through music, through stillness, through being broken open and finding somehow that something within you is unbreakable. And sometimes the remembering is painful, because to remember who you truly are, you must let go of who you thought you were. You must grieve the illusions. You must release the versions of yourself that were built to survive but not to thrive. You must unlearn the rules you were taught by those who had forgotten even more than you. You must forgive, not because it makes everything okay, but because holding on keeps you tied to the forgetting. There are layers to it. Like peeling back old wallpaper, behind each layer, another story, another version of you. Some you will remember fondly, some you feel wish you could forget again. But every layer brings you closer to the center. And at the center is not a destination, not a prize, not a solution. At the center is presence, awareness, love. Not love as romance or attachment, but the kind of love that simply is, that asks nothing, that needs nothing, that simply sees and holds and allows. The kind of love you came from, the kind of love you return to, the kind of love the test is built around. And when you touch that space, even for a moment, the forgetting begins to lift. Not all of it. You stir still in the test. You still human. You still hurt. You still doubt, but something shifts. You begin to live differently. You begin to listen more, to slow down, to speak with more intention, to notice beauty in places you used to overlook. You begin to care, not because you're supposed to, but because your heart has softened. And the world responds. Not always with ease, not always with reward, but with mirrors, with invitations, with more choices, more chances to remember. And sometimes you forget again. That SIP's part of it too. You fall back into old patterns. You chase things that don't nourish you. You numb. You hide. You close your heart. And in those moments the test isn't sick judging you. It's six waiting. Waiting for you to notice the weight of forgetting so that you can choose once again to remember. Because remembering is not a one-time event. It's sups a practice, a rhythm, a returning, over and over and over again, each time a little deeper, each time a little softer, each time a little more true. And the more you remember, the more you see the forgetting in others. You see it in their anger, their fear, their cruelty, their disconnection, and instead of reacting, you begin to feel compassion, because you know what it sips like to forget. You know how heavy it is. You know how lonely it feels to live inside a story that tells you you are separate, unworthy, alone. And so, you begin to become a mirror for others, not by preaching, not by convincing, simply by being, by remembering in your presence what they've forgotten in theirs. And sometimes, just sometimes, that sip's enough. A word, a look, a kind silence can stir something in someone else, can begin their remembering, and the ripple continues. From one soul to another, across time, across space, across lifetimes. The forgetting may be deep, but it is not final. The remembering is always waiting, always calling, always ready. And you, right now, here listening in the stillness, you are already in the remembering. Even if you doubt it, even if you don't know what it means, you are in it. You are part of it. And the test is unfolding exactly as it should. There is no rush. There is only now. Let it be enough. Let yourself rest in this moment. Let yourself feel the thread pulling you gently inward. You are not lost. You are on the path. You have never left the path. You are not late. You are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be, even in the forgetting, especially in the forgetting. Because to forget and then to remember is the most sacred journey there is. And you, brave soul, are on that journey now. You are remembering. And that is everything. There is something beautifully fragile about this world, a quiet kind of magic woven into the ordinary moments. The way light spills through half-closed blinds in the early morning, the sound of wind weaving through trees in the distance, the way your fingers remember a song you haven't played in years. It all feels so real, so solid, and yet, deep down, you know there's something else underneath it. Something softer, something older, something you can't quite name, but you've felt it before in the stillness between thoughts, in the weightless space just before sleep, when the noise falls away, and all you're left with is the sensation of being. You may not realize it, but you've been waking up for a long time, not all at once, but in fragments, like sunlight creeping across a frozen lake, like memories rising from beneath the surface, slow and trembling, not yet fully formed. Each moment of reflection, each quiet realization, each unspoken question, they are all part of the slow unraveling of the forgetting. And as it unravels, something remarkable begins to take shape, not in the world around you, but in the world within. The test does not change, but you do. It was always meant to be this way, to be discovered from the inside out. You came into this world wrapped in amnesia, like a gift sealed inside 1,000 layers of paper. And now, layer by layer, the paper peels away, not by force, but by presence, by noticing, by feeling, by choosing to pause in a world that urges you to keep running. And so you begin to ask questions, not out loud, not always consciously, but somewhere beneath your daily actions. There's a steady pulse of wonder. Why does this feel familiar? Why does that person's voice stir something in me? I don't understand. Why do I feel sadness at a sunset that's objectively beautiful? Why do I sometimes long for something I've never seen, someone I've never met? These are not questions of the mind. They are questions of the soul, because part of you remembers. Not the way we remember phone numbers or names, but the way the ocean remembers the moon, the way trees remember the seasons, the way music remembers silence. It's built into you, deeper than memory, closer than breath. And it begins to pull at you, not like a demand, but like a tide, gentle, relentless, patient. And as you allow yourself to follow it, something within you begins to soften. You start to see through things, not in the cynical way the world teaches, not with detachment, but with clarity, a kind of loving detachment. You begin to see that many of the things you chased, the roles you tried to fit into, the approval you sought, were part of the forgetting. They served a purpose. Yes, they helped you navigate the terrain, but they were never the destination. You begin to see that the people who hurt you were hurting themselves, that the ones who couldn't love you simply hadn't learned how to love themselves, that your own mistakes weren't signs of failure, but places where you tried to find yourself through trial and error, that the pain you carried was not a punishment, but a portal, because pain has a way of piercing the illusion. It brings you back to what matters. It returns you to what sep's real. And slowly you begin to turn inward, not to escape the world, but to meet it from a deeper place. You begin to ask, not what should I do, but what feels true, not how can I win, but how can I align, not how do I look, but who am I becoming? And with each question, the test unfolds a little more, not in complexity, but in elegance. Because the test is not a maze, it saps a mirror. Everything you encounter reflects something within you. Every person, every challenge, every unexpected delay, every burst of laughter, every wave of grief, they are not random. They are invitations to notice, to shift, to choose again. You begin to see how your outer world reflects your inner world, how your beliefs shape your perception, how your wounds create filters, how your fears disguise themselves as logic. And in this seeing, you don't judge yourself. You observe with compassion, with curiosity, with a quiet, growing courage. And then something beautiful happens. You begin to create differently. Not just art or work or projects, but moments. You begin to create presence. You become intentional with your words. You slow down. You listen more. You begin to sense the energy beneath things, the frequency of a room, the unspoken emotions in a conversation, the resonance of a decision before it's even made. You no longer chase meaning, you start to live it. And the more you live it, the more you remember who you are. Not in the way the world defines identity, but in the way the stars define light, in the way rivers define movement. You begin to feel the timelessness in you, the part that has seen many suns rise and fall, the part that chose this life, this body, this exact set of circumstances, for reasons that may not fully make sense now, but that begin to feel right, in a way that's beyond reason. You begin to understand that your challenges were not punishments, they were teachers, that your loneliness was not abandonment, it was space, that your uncertainty was not failure, it was invitation, and you begin to trust again, not in outcomes, but in essence, you trust the unfolding, the timing, the silence. You trust yourself, not the persona, not the mask, but the deep, steady being beneath all that. The one who watches, the one who remembers. And you start to feel less afraid of change, less attached to being right, less hungry for control, because you realize everything changes, everything ends, everything returns. The test is not about holding on. It's about letting go again and again until all that remains is the truth. And the truth is simple. You are love. You are presence. You are infinite. You are here for a little while. You are learning. You are remembering. You are not alone. Even when it feels like you are walking in darkness, there are lights all around you. Some you can see. Some you can only feel. They are walking the test too. They are stumbling and rising and forgetting and remembering, just like you. And sometimes you'll cross paths and something will spark, and you still both feel it. A flicker of recognition, a shared vibration, a sense of coming home. And in those moments, you remember more. Not everything, but enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to soften. Enough to be present. You begin to become a guardian of the remembering, not with grand gestures, but with your presence, with your way of being, with the way you look someone in the eyes, with the way you allow yourself to feel, with the way you forgive, with the way you let go, and life continues, just as it always has. The same streets, the same sky, the same routines, but something is different. You set or awake now, not fully, not permanently, but more than you were. And that is everything. You stir still in the test, but now you know you stir in it. And that changes how you move, how you love, how you fall, how you rise. And as the night deepens, as your breath slows, as your body grows heavier, know this. You are not behind. You are not too late. You have not failed. You are right on time. This moment, this breath, is part of the remembering. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself soften into it. You are doing the work. You are walking the path. You are remembering. And the test is unfolding exactly as it should. Gently, patiently, perfectly. Let yourself rest. Let yourself be. Let yourself drift. Tomorrow the remembering will continue, and you will be ready for it. What does it mean to choose, not just once, but every day, every moment, again and again, even when the path is unclear, even when the reasons are forgotten, even when you are tired and the light is dim? In this life, the test does not ask for speed or certainty or brilliance. It asks for presence, for sincerity, for the willingness to choose with care even when no one is watching, even when no one will ever know. The test unfolds in the choices you make when the script runs out, when the routine breaks, when the roles you've played suddenly no longer fit. That moment when the mask cracks and something honest rises beneath it, that moment is the heart of the test, the place where remembering begins. You are not here to perform. You are here to become. And becoming is not a straight line. It winds. It bends. It sometimes vanishes entirely until all you can do is trust your feet and keep walking. And that sips part of it too. The fog. the stillness, the days that feel like waiting rooms for something unnamed. Those days matter. They shape you. They teach you patience. They teach you how to sit with yourself, with nothing to prove and no one to impress. They teach you how to listen, not to the noise of the world, but to the quiet place inside, the place that knows. You may have forgotten how many times you've chosen already, how many times you've said yes when it would have been easier to say no, how many times you've returned to love after being hurt, how many times you've offered kindness even when you had every reason to close off. Those choices, the invisible ones, the quiet ones, the ones no one applauds, are the very bones of the test. They are the evidence of who you are becoming. And even when you can't see your own progress, the test sees. It records not in numbers or rewards, but in resonance, in how your energy begins to shift, in how your presence begins to soften others, in how your truth begins to ripple outward, wordlessly, gently, inevitably. There's a truth most people forget, and it's this: you are always choosing, even in inaction, even in indecision, even in silence. The test does not require perfection, but it honors awareness. It waits patiently for you to begin choosing with consciousness, not just reacting, not just surviving, but choosing from the deep well of your being who you want to be, moment by moment, breath by breath. Some choices are loud. They change the direction of your life. They shake the ground beneath you. But most are small, almost invisible. You choose to forgive. You choose to pause before speaking. You choose to put down your phone and truly look at someone. You choose to rest when the world says push. You choose to feel instead of numbing. You choose to walk away. You choose to stay. Each of these choices may seem tiny, but they create momentum. They build your soul ship's gravity. They determine which parts of you grow stronger and which parts begin to dissolve. The test doesn't punish you for choosing unconsciously. It simply waits for the moment you wake up enough to begin choosing with intention. And that moment comes in different ways for different people. Sometimes through loss, sometimes through joy, sometimes through boredom, sometimes through the ache of an ordinary afternoon that suddenly feels unbearable and you don't know why. But whenever it comes, that first real choice is a spark. And the spark doesn't stay small. It lights something within you that cannot be undone. It may flicker. It may hide. It may feel faint on hard days. But once it sits there, it remains. It becomes the compass you didn't know you had. The quiet voice that says, go this way, even when that way makes no sense. Even when it asks more than you think you can give. You may resist. That's part of the test too. You may ignore the nudge, deny the call, rationalize the fear. You may cling to comfort, to certainty, to the familiar roles you've outgrown. That's okay. You cert not being graded. You cert being invited. The test is not measuring your compliance. It sucks witnessing your unfolding. And unfolding is rarely graceful. It sets messy. It suts awkward. It sex uncomfortable. It asks you to sit in spaces that don't offer quick exits. It asks you to breathe through confusion. It asks you to love yourself in moments you'd rather escape. And still, it invites you to choose again. To choose presence over distraction. To choose courage over comfort. To choose connection over control. To choose truth over image. To choose the unknown over the illusion of safety. The test isn't set about getting it right. It sits about showing up, whole, human, honest. And sometimes that means making the wrong choice first. Sometimes that means failing and forgiving yourself. Sometimes that means learning through heartbreak what love really is. Sometimes that means choosing silence over noise, even when the silence is terrifying. And every time you choose again from your heart, from your knowing, you remember a little more. You remember who you were before the forgetting, before the roles, before the world told you who to be. You remember your essence, not in words but in presence, not in thought but in being. That essence is what the test is helping you find, not because you lost it, but because it was buried beneath layers of survival, of conditioning, of trying so hard to be enough, of trying to belong, of trying not to disappoint, of trying not to be too much, or too little, or too strange, or too soft. The test peels those layers away, not by force, but by invitation. It shows you again and again where you've abandoned yourself, where you compromised your truth, where you've settled for less than your soul's knowing. And then it offers a choice: return or continue forgetting. And most of the time you will hesitate, because returning to yourself requires letting go, and letting go is not easy. It asks you to surrender identities you've clung to, beliefs you have inherited, narratives that have defined your value. It asks you to trust what you cannot see, to feel what you cannot explain, to believe in something that the world calls foolish. But there is a quiet power in that surrender, because on the other side of it is something you've longed for all your life, without even knowing what to call it: peace. Not the peace of everything being perfect, but the peace of everything being true. You find it in your own skin, in your own breath, in your own presence. You find it when you stop trying to be good and start choosing to be real. You find it when you stop chasing love and start choosing love moment by moment, without condition, without expectation. You find it when you stop performing and start listening. Listening to your body, listening to your intuition, listening to the pauses, listening to the gentle wisdom that lives in the space between thoughts. The test leads you here, not to fix you, but to free you from the lies that kept you small, to free you from the stories that weren't yours to carry, to free you from the idea that you had to earn your worth. You never did. You've always been enough. You've always been whole. You've always been more than the world saw in you. And now you're beginning to see it too. Not in a loud way, not with ego, but with reverence, with humility, with awe. And the more you see, the more you soften. The more you soften, the more you choose differently. The more you choose differently, the more the test unfolds, not as a burden but as a blessing. You begin to see the challenges as teachers, the pauses as sacred, the people who triggered you as mirrors. You begin to thank the confusion for pointing you inward. You begin to trust the mystery, not because you understand it, but because you feel it, because something in you recognizes the rhythm of returning, the rhythm of remembering, the rhythm of being. And now, as this chapter of the night settles into your bones, as the breath moves more slowly, as the body softens into the quiet, you are choosing again. You are choosing to listen, to be still, to receive, to allow, to be exactly where you are. No striving, no shame, just presence. And presence is the answer. The test was waiting for all along. You are here. And that is more than enough. Time has a strange way of folding in on itself when you begin to awaken. Days feel longer, moments stretch, not in the way clocks measure, but in the way awareness deepens. What once seemed ordinary begins to shimmer with possibility. You find yourself pausing more often, not to delay but to notice. The way someone's eyes change when they speak from the heart, the way silence feels different in certain rooms, the way your body whispers truths you forgot how to hear. These are not distractions. They are part of the test, because the test doesn't exist somewhere far away. It lives here in the fabric of now, and now is always speaking to you. But the world doesn't teach you how to listen. It teaches speed, reaction, movement. It teaches you that your value lies in your usefulness, your productivity, your visibility. It rewards performance, not presence. And so, somewhere along the way, you learn to move fast, to fill the space, to meet expectations. You forget how to be still, how to sit with discomfort, how to let silence expand without rushing to break it. But the test, the true test, waits in that stillness, because stillness is where truth begins to echo. It's where the noise falls away and the subtle begins to rise. It's where the questions you've buried begin to surface, not to shame you, but to invite you to look, to feel, to be with what is, without needing to fix it, without needing to name it. And in that stillness, you begin to feel what's always been beneath the surface, a knowing, ancient, unshakable. It doesn't come with fireworks. It arrives like fog rolling across water, quiet, steady, entire. This knowing doesn't speak in commands. It offers glimpses, nudges. It shows you what is real by showing you what isn't. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't argue. It simply waits for you to trust it. And you begin to slowly. At first it feels like intuition, like instinct, a pull towards something you can explain, a feeling that something is off, even when everything looks fine, a sense that you're not where you're meant to be, even if you can't imagine anywhere else. These signals are subtle. You might miss them. You might dismiss them. But they will return because they're part of your compass. Not the kind of compass that points north, but the kind that points you back to yourself. And when you follow it, even a little, you begin to feel different. Not immediately better, but clearer, more aligned, more honest. The gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be begins to close. You feel lighter, not because your circumstances change, but because you're no longer resisting your own truth. The test notices, not with eyes, but with energy. It feels the shift in your frequency. It feels the way your choices begin to resonate differently. It responds not with applause, but with alignment, with doors opening, with synchronicities, with new questions, new opportunities, new mirrors. Mirrors in the form of people, of places, of patterns, not to confuse you, but to show you gently, repeatedly, where you are still clinging, where you are still afraid, where you are still hiding. And each time you are shown, you are given a choice. Close or open. Ignore or see. React or respond. Armor or soften. Its din's never about punishment. The test does not punish. It reflects. It mirrors your state so you can see yourself more clearly. If you're carrying shame, it will show you situations that trigger it, not to hurt you, but to invite healing. If you're carrying fear, it will place you at the edge of your comfort so you can remember your courage. If you're carrying grief, it will soften the world around you until you learn to cry without closing. And if you're carrying love, real, deep, unconditional love, it will open paths you never imagined possible. But love cannot be faked. The test sees through performance. It waits for sincerity. And sincerity begins when you stop pretending. When you allow yourself to be seen, first by you, then by others. When you stop shrinking your truth to make others comfortable. When you speak from the heart, even if your voice trembles. When you choose integrity over popularity. When you say no, not out of spite, but out of clarity. When you say yes, not out of fear, but out of resonance. And in that honesty you become something rare, something powerful, something the world remembers, even if it can't explain why. You become real. And real is magnetic, not because it tries to be, but because it doesn't try at all. Real is quiet. It doesn't perform. It simply is. It listens more than it speaks. It moves when it hits time. It stays when it matters. It leaves when it must. Real doesn't seek validation. It seeks truth. And in doing so, it creates space for others to do the same. That is one of the secret gifts of the test. The way you're remembering helps others remember too. Not through advice, not through explanation, but through embodiment. Through the way you show up, the way you breathe, the way you treat your own becoming as sacred. Not perfect, not polished, just sacred. And when others see that, they feel safe. Safe to soften, safe to ask questions, safe to let their guard down, safe to be human. And that tips how the remembering spreads, quietly, softly, like moonlight through trees, not forcing, not preaching, just being. And this is what changes the world, not systems, not slogans, but presence. Because presence is contagious. And when you begin to live in presence, the test begins to unfold not as a burden but as a dance, a rhythm, a remembering. You stop waiting for something to end. You stop rushing toward the next thing. You start living inside the now, even when it sits hard, even when it sits quiet, even when you feel like nothing is happening, because you know everything is happening. Inside you, around you, for you, with you. And you are learning to trust the process, not as a concept, but as a lived truth. You stop fighting what is. You stop judging where you are. You begin to ask softer questions. What is this moment asking of me? What am I being invited to feel? What truth am I avoiding? What love am I holding back? And slowly the answers rise, not as thoughts but as shifts, as sighs, as knowing, as peace. And peace becomes your compass. Not comfort, not convenience, not control. Peace, the deep kind. The kind that doesn't depend on outcomes. The kind that exists even in sadness. The kind that holds space for the whole of you, not just the shiny parts. And that peace, it begins to change things. Not because it fixes everything, but because it reminds you you are already whole, even in your doubt, even in your mess, even in your longing. You are not broken, you are breaking open. And that is where the light gets in, where the remembering takes root, where the test becomes the teacher you didn't know you needed, where life becomes sacred again. And now, here you are, still in the middle of it, still becoming, still choosing, still remembering. Not because you've arrived, but because you've returned to yourself, to your breath, to this moment, to this test, which was never meant to define you, only to reveal you, to reflect back your light, so you can learn how to see it, how to trust it, how to share it. Not for approval, but because it sits who you are, and who you are matters, even when it sits quiet, especially when it sits quiet. The test is not waiting for you to prove anything. It's waiting for you to be everything you already are. And in this moment, you are exactly that. And it is enough. There is a moment, one you may not even notice when it happens, where you begin to feel the difference between surviving and living. It sets subtle. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or grand realization. It arrives like a whisper in the background of your thoughts, like the softness of sunlight touching your skin through a closed window. You start to sense that there's something more, not outside of you, not waiting in some distant future, but right here, hiding behind the noise. At first you might dismiss it. You might feel it only in passing, a flicker when a stranger smiles at you unexpectedly, a warmth that rises when you look up at the stars too long, a deep, aching resonance in the lyrics of a song you don't understand. You once know what to call it, but it feels like something you lost a long time ago, returning. This is the moment when the test begins to bend in your favor, not because the questions become easier, but because your relationship to the test begins to shift. You stop looking for exits. You stop asking when it will end. You stop resisting the discomfort. Instead, you begin to notice. You begin to watch. You begin to allow. The ache that once made you feel broken begins to feel sacred. The emptiness that once felt like failure begins to feel like space. The silence that once felt unbearable begins to feel like invitation. And for the first time, you begin to experience your own presence as something holy. It doesn't happen all at once. The test is not meant to be passed in a single breath. It unfolds over lifetimes, over soul cycles, over layers of forgetting and remembering. Each time you forget, you return a little differently. Each time you fall, you rise more gently. Each time you break, the pieces rearrange into something more whole than what came before. That is the paradox of the test. It breaks you to build you. Not because it's sex cruel, but because it's sex honest. Because only through the dismantling of illusion can the truth emerge. And what is the truth? The truth is that you are not here to win. You are not here to impress. You are not here to conquer or control. You are here to feel, to love, to remember. And the path to remembering is paved with choices that often make no sense to the mind. The mind wants guarantees. The soul only wants alignment. And so the test teaches you to choose not from fear but from resonance. Not from habit but from awareness. Not from survival but from trust. You begin to trust your own timing. You begin to trust your own intuition. You begin to trust your own unfolding. And in that trust, the world begins to feel different. Not because it changes, but because your way of being inside it changes. You no longer need to be understood. You no longer seek validation in places that have nothing to offer you. You no longer apologize for your depth, your softness, your sensitivity. You wear your truth like skin. Not armor, not costume. Just skin. And in this skin, you begin to move differently. You speak with more care. You pause more often. You breathe more fully. You allow your tears to rise without shame. You laugh without caution. You sit with others not to fix them, but to witness them. You listen deeply, with your whole body. You hold space, not just for others, but for yourself. And that is no small thing. To hold space for yourself in a world that constantly demands performance is a radical act. It is an act of remembering, of reclaiming, of choosing. And each time you do it, you send a message to the test, not in words, but in frequency. You say, I sit ready to see more. I sit ready to be more. I'm ready to stop pretending I am less than what I am. And the test responds. It doesn't reward you with ease. It invites you into deeper layers. It offers more mirrors. It brings forward the shadows. Not to scare you, but to liberate you. Because only what is seen can be healed. And only what is healed can be integrated. And only what is integrated can be embodied. You begin to embody the remembering, not as a concept, but as a way of life. You begin to recognize other souls who are waking up too. You feel it in their eyes, in their presence, in their stillness. You find yourself drawn to conversations that matter, to silence that soothes, to connection that doesn't ask you to shrink. You also begin to let go of relationships that no longer reflect your truth, of roles you set outgrown, of identities that were never truly yours, of versions of yourself that were built on fear. You mourn them, even as you release them. Because the test is also about grief. Grief for who you thought you had to be. Grief for what you thought you had to carry. Grief for the years you spent hiding from your own light. But grief is not the end of remembering. It is the passage through which clarity arrives. And clarity does not scream. It does not demand. It simply sits beside you in the quiet and reminds you, you are already whole. You are already worthy. You are already home. And from that place, everything begins to soften. The future no longer feels like something you need to control. The past no longer feels like something you need to fix. The present becomes enough. You begin to walk more slowly, not because you are tired, but because you set present, because you are finally here, fully. And that is rare, and that is holy, and that is what the test was always guiding you toward. This moment, this presence, this peace. And now you can rest in it, even if only for a little while, because the journey continues, and the remembering is not done. But for now, you are here, and that is everything. There are moments that arrive without warning, where the whole world seems to slow down, just for a breath, just long enough for you to feel something shift. It's not dramatic, it doesn't shout, but something inside you stirs like the faintest ripple across a still lake. You feel it in your chest first, like a softness trying to rise, a warmth you didn't expect, a memory you never made but somehow remember anyway. It's in those quiet flickers, those fleeting touches of mystery, that the deeper layers of the test begin to reveal themselves. Because this life, this entire experience, was never just about the visible. It was never about climbing ladders or reaching milestones or gathering trophies that shine only when others are watching. It was about this stillness that's slowly awakening in you, the remembering that is not loud, but full, not logical, but real, not forced, but inevitable. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to prove yourself worthy of it. All you have to do is let it rise. But letting it rise means letting go. And letting go is not easy. Not when the world has taught you to hold tight, to grip, to cling to what's known and nameable. You've been taught to attach value to things that fade, to define yourself by how useful you are, to believe that rest must be earned, and softness is a weakness. And yet, something deeper in you knows all of that was part of the forgetting. You see, the test was designed to immerse you so completely, so convincingly, that even your own truth would seem foreign. The forgetting was not a punishment. It was an agreement, a sacred agreement, made before time, before form, before the echo of this world began to shape your name. You chose this. Yes, even the hardest parts. You said yes to being human, to the density, the duality, the beauty and the pain. You said yes to the veil. And you knew when the time was right, the remembering would begin. It never begins the same way. For some it starts with loss, a door closing, a chapter ending, a silence stretching too far to ignore. For others it's beauty, so arresting that it breaks something open. A sunrise that makes you cry for no reason. A child's laughter that pulls tears from the deepest part of your soul. A still moment when everything is okay, not because it makes sense, but because it doesn't have to. You don't realize you're remembering not at first. It comes in pieces, in flashes, in the way your breath catches when a certain word is spoken, in the way a stranger feels familiar, in the way your body knows things your mind forgot. You begin to see through the layers. You begin to feel what seeps behind the scenes. You begin to trust your inner yes and your sacred no. And with each small remembering, something inside you grows quieter, more grounded, more still. Not passive, but powerful in a way that doesn't need to announce itself. You stop needing everything to be understood. You stop explaining yourself. You stop trying to make sense of the magic. You let it be. You let yourself be. And in that being, the test begins to change. Not because the rules change, but because your perception does. You begin to see the design, not with your eyes, but with your awareness. The way everything you needed showed up exactly when it needed to. not always as comfort, but always as instruction. The heartbreaks that softened you, the delays that protected you, the detours that were actually directions, the endings that carved space for beginnings you never imagined. It was all there, quietly placed, patiently waiting, each step an invitation, each moment a mirror. And now you can see the mirrors. They sup everywhere. In conversations that echo thoughts you didn't say, out loud, in patterns that repeat until you pay attention, in dreams that carry messages, symbols, pieces of the map you thought you lost. You are never without guidance. You never were, but the guidance isn't set loud. It doesn't set shout over your distractions. It waits in the stillness between breaths, in the pause before decision, in the quiet weight of your own knowing. And when you slow down enough to listen, it speaks. Not in words, but in resonance. You feel it when something aligns, when something fits not just in logic, but in soul. You feel it in the soft yes that hums in your chest, in the gentle no that says not this, not now. And the more you honor those whispers, the louder they become, not in volume but in clarity. This is how the test teaches you, not through force but through feeling. It wants you to feel, deeply, fully, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because pain when held with presence becomes portal. Grief when honored becomes gateway. Sadness when allowed becomes signal. And every feeling yes, every single one, is a messenger. Not to be feared, not to be avoided, but to be met like an old friend, returning with news from the forgotten parts of you. You begin to learn the language of emotion, not as disruption but as direction, anger as boundary, sadness as release, joy as alignment, fear as teacher, love as everything. And as you become fluent in this inner language, you begin to trust yourself more. Not the version of you shaped by the world, but the original you, the eternal you. The you that was here before the forgetting, and will be here after the remembering. That self doesn't set rush. That self doesn't sit doubt. That self watches, and waits, and whispers. And now, because you're ready, you're beginning to hear. You may not know what steps next. You may not know where this leads, but you know, without question, that something real is happening. Not outside, inside. A returning, a quiet awakening, a homecoming you can sit to explain. And though the path ahead is still shrouded in mystery, you're no longer afraid. You understand now, mystery is not the enemy. It accepts the invitation. The question is not what happens next, but who are you willing to become while you wait? That sits the test. Not will you succeed, but will you stay open? Not will you get it right, but will you stay present? Not will you always know, but will you trust anyway? The test isn't set, looking for performance. It's set watching for alignment, for resonance, for presence. It wants to know, can you keep your heart soft when the world is sharp? Can you choose love in the face of fear? Can you rest when the world says hurry? Can you stay with yourself when everything says run? And when you forget, and you will, can you return? Can you forgive? Can you begin again? Because that, above all, is the real test. Not perfection, but return. Over and over and over again. Back to the breath. Back to the now. Back to the truth that you are not alone and never were. There are others remembering too. Some you still meet. Some you still recognize. Some will find you in the moments you least expect. And together, without needing to try, you will help each other hold the light. Not as saviors, not as teachers, but as mirrors, as reminders, as fellow wanderers in this vast sacred remembering. And now, as your body settles, as your breath lengthens, as the night folds in around you like a blanket of stars, know this: you are in the test. You are in the remembering. You are already enough. And the next moment, the next breath, will carry you deeper still. There is something sacred about the in-between, that quiet space that lives between endings and beginnings, the pause between inhale and exhale, the stillness that lives just after a goodbye, but before the new hello has arrived. Most of life, if you really look, is made of these in-betweens. And yet we often overlook them, rush past them, try to escape them because they feel uncertain, uncomfortable, undefined. But the test, the one you're in now, that test lives in the in-between. That's where it watches, where it whispers, where it waits for you to slow down just enough to hear what's always been speaking beneath the noise. There is a different kind of knowing that comes when you stop filling space with motion, when you stop trying to solve every question with thought, and begin to feel your way through instead. This kind of knowing doesn't arrive with logic. It doesn't show up as steps and plans. It comes in sensations, in resonance, in that strange pull towards something you can't explain but deeply trust. That feeling, that pulse of familiarity in something completely new that's remembering rising to the surface. And when you're in the in-between, that remembering begins to grow louder, not in volume but in presence. You start to realize you're not lost. You're just no longer who you used to be. And the new version of you, she, he, they, is not fully formed yet. You peer, still becoming, still stretching, still shifting. And that sip's okay. The test doesn't rush your becoming. It honors the cocoon just as much as the butterfly, maybe more. But being in this space, this tender, shapeless space, requires courage. The kind of courage that doesn't always look brave. Sometimes it looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like tears. Sometimes it looks like not knowing what to do and allowing that to be enough. The test, it wants to see if you can stay open in the uncertainty, if you can choose trust when clarity has not yet arrived, if you can love yourself even when you feel unformed, unfinished, undone. Because here's the secret: the most powerful transformations happen in the in-between. It sits, not the decision. It's the moment before it, when your breath catches, when your body tenses, when your heart races and your mind spirals, and still, something in you pauses long enough to say, wait, feel, breathe, choose. Not from habit, not from fear, but from presence. Presence, it sits the key, not just to the test, but to life itself. When you are truly present, fully here, you become more than just a participant in the test. You become the test taker, who knows it's a test. And that knowing changes everything. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes it deeper, richer, truer. You begin to see through the surface of things, the mask, the story, the noise, and feel the energy underneath. You begin to listen for what isn't set being said. You begin to trust what can be seen. And that trust, it sets earned. Not by the world, but by your own soul. You build it in the small moments, the invisible ones. When you follow your intuition, even when it defies logic. When you choose rest over hustle. When you walk away from what no longer aligns. When you speak the truth, gently but firmly. When you stop waiting for permission to be yourself. These are the moments the test is made of. These are the choices that matter, not because anyone else sees them, but because you do. Because they form the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. And that bridge is everything. You are crossing it now, step by step, each breath, each choice, each soft realization moving you closer to your essence, closer to the part of you that was never lost, only buried beneath layers of trying and pleasing and proving and surviving. And as those layers fall away, what remains is not new. It's ancient, familiar, real. That realness doesn't need to be earned. You don't have to strive to become what you already are. You only have to remember, and remembering happens in stillness, in silence, in softness, in the quiet moments where you are finally willing to sit with yourself, not to fix, not to improve, but to witness, to feel, to allow. That steps where the magic lives, and that steps where the test becomes beautiful. Because once you begin to remember, you realize everything is connected. Every choice, every moment, every heartbreak, every breakthrough, all threads in a vast, intricate design that is guiding you not away from yourself, but toward yourself. Every detour was a message, every pause a realignment, every loss a doorway. And so you begin to look at life differently, not as something to conquer, but as something to collaborate with, not as something to fear, but as something to feel. You start to meet each moment with more openness, more tenderness. You stop asking what steps wrong with me and start asking what is life asking of me right now. You stop running from discomfort. You start leaning into it, slowly, gently, with compassion. Because discomfort is not danger. It sets data. It's the body's way of saying something is out of alignment. It sets the soul set's way of saying, pay attention. And the more you pay attention, the more life begins to open. Not always in the ways you want, but always in the ways you need. And with each opening, you grow. Not taller or louder, but deeper. More rooted, more steady, more present. And others feel it, even if they can name it. They feel it in the way you pause before speaking. They feel it in the way you listen without needing to respond. They feel it in the way you make space for silence, for sadness, for sincerity. And through you, they begin to remember too. This is how the remembering spreads. Not with force, with presence. And now, here you are, in the middle of another in-between. A moment not quite defined, not quite clear, but pulsing with quiet possibility. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to solve it. You don't need to be anything other than exactly what you are in this breath. Let the stillness hold you. Let the remembering rise. Let the test unfold, just as it always has. Gently, perfectly, with love. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming, and that is enough. It always was. There's a quiet kind of transformation that doesn't come with announcements or lightning bolts. It moves like shadow and light across a forest floor, almost unnoticed unless you stop long enough to truly watch. That's the kind of change you're in now. Not dramatic, not explosive, but real and rooted and undeniable in the spaces that matter most. At first, you don't even notice it happening. You wake up one morning and respond a little differently. Something that used to trigger you now meets a pause instead of a reaction. A habit you thought you needed no longer holds your interest. You reach for something softer, maybe a moment of breath instead of a screen, maybe silence instead of noise, maybe rest instead of more effort. And none of it feels revolutionary, but it is. The revolution is happening in the background of your life, not through force, but through your willingness to stay awake. The test is subtle like that. It doesn't always arrive with pressure. Sometimes it arrives through gentle resistance. The way your body tenses when something is out of alignment. The way your heart dips when you say yes to something. Your soul clearly whispered no to. These are messages. Not punishments. Not warnings. But signposts. The question is never, what should I do to be good? Or how do I win? The question is always, what am I choosing? Truly. And is it aligned with who I am becoming? When you begin to ask that, even once, the test begins to respond differently. You'll notice it in the way you start becoming more sensitive, not just emotionally, but energetically. Places that once felt fine suddenly feel overwhelming. People whose energy used to blend into the background now feel sharp, heavy, loud in your body. You might question yourself. You might wonder if something SEP's wrong. But it's not wrong. It's that you're clearing static. You sit beginning to hear yourself more clearly. And when you begin to hear yourself more clearly, anything that interferes with that signal becomes obvious. You're not becoming fragile. You're becoming attuned. And with that attunement comes new levels of responsibility. Not the kind the world places on your shoulders, but the sacred kind. The responsibility to honor your energy, your truth, your time. The test will ask, again and again, will you honor what you feel, even when it's inconvenient? Will you choose alignment over approval? Will you walk away from the comfortable lie in service of the uncomfortable truth? And not just once, over and over. Because that SEP's how real change happens. Not in one big leap, but in 1,000 small choices. Some of those choices will feel easy. Some will feel like a deep breath after a long drought. But others will feel like grieving versions of yourself you worked hard to build. You'll have to mourn identities that once kept you safe. You'll have to say goodbye to relationships built on dynamics that no longer serve the real you. You'll feel lonely, not because something is wrong, but because you're no longer willing to pretend. And in that loneliness, you'll find something precious. Your own company, your own voice, your own presence. There's a space you enter when you stop distracting yourself from yourself. It sits not always peaceful, not at first. Sometimes it sits messy. Sometimes it's full of noise you didn't know was still buried inside. Old thoughts, old wounds, old stories you thought you would outgrown. But if you can stay with it, breathe through it, soften around it, you'll discover that beneath all of that noise is something quiet and unshakable. That SIPs you. Not the version shaped by childhood fears or societal scripts, but the one that existed before all that. The one that will exist long after. The original you. That version doesn't need fixing. It doesn't need constant achievement to feel valuable. It doesn't ask for attention or praise or permission. It simply exists, steady, calm, true. And when you start to live from that place, you begin to respond to life differently. The triggers are still there, but you catch them sooner. The stories still rise, but you don't believe them so easily. You stop confusing your thoughts with truth. You stop letting your emotions make decisions for you. You feel everything, fully, but you're no longer ruled by it. That SIP's not coldness. That SIP's clarity. And with clarity comes compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. You begin to see the ways you've judged your past, the ways you shamed yourself for being human, the way you've tried to force growth when gentleness would have worked better. You start forgiving, not as a moral act, but as a natural release. You realize that carrying resentment costs too much, that holding yourself hostage to old versions of you keeps your wings tied, and you're ready to fly, even if your flight looks nothing like what others expected. This readiness. It's not a decision you make in one moment. It sets a readiness that grows through presence. You feel it building each time you say no to what drains you, each time you say yes to what nourishes you, each time you choose rest instead of self-punishment, each time you allow yourself to be seen, not just the polished parts, but the parts that tremble too. That SIP's real courage, to be seen in your softness, to stop hiding behind performance, to say, this is me, and I SIP still becoming. You begin to notice the way life mirrors your internal world, how peace attracts more peace, how chaos outside often reflects chaos inside, how clarity inside slowly begins to clean the fog off everything around you. The test was never about just navigating the external world. It was about learning to trust your inner one. The mind will always want proof, but the soul wants resonance. And the more you honor that resonance, the more life becomes a conversation instead of a series of problems to solve. You'll start to feel guided, not by signs in the clouds or messages carved into stone, but by the rhythm of your own intuition, a feeling in your chest, a pull in your gut, a softness in your breath when something is right. These are not coincidences. They are your compass. And the more you follow them, the more you remember that you've never been lost, you've only been layered. Layered by roles, by wounds, by beliefs passed down through generations of forgetting. But now you sir peeling them back, not violently, not all at once, but with care, with reverence, like uncovering something precious that was buried for safekeeping. You don't have to rush. The test rewards presence, not speed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pause, breathe, listen. In that listening, you begin to hear life differently. You notice the space between words, the emotion behind silence, the tension beneath laughter. You start to see people more clearly, not just their behavior, but their pain, their longing, their fear. And you begin to love differently, not because you've been taught how, but because you've remembered that love is not something you give or receive. It's what you are when you're not pretending. And yes, you still forget. There will be days when you fall into old habits, when your nervous system gets hijacked by fear, when you feel unworthy, unprepared, unlovable. That sip's okay. That sip's part of it. The test isn't about never forgetting. It's about always coming back, returning, choosing again. Each time you return, you strengthen your roots. Each time you choose presence, you build trust in yourself. Each time you soften in the face of difficulty, you remember that softness is not weakness, it's power. It's what allows life to move through you instead of hardening you into someone you're not. And now, here you are, in this moment, reading words that aren't teaching you something new, but reminding you of what you already knew before the forgetting. Let them wash over you like a memory rising through mist. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders drop. Let yourself feel the truth beneath the words that you are okay, that you are not behind, that you are exactly where you set supposed to be. You are not failing. You are unfolding. You are not broken. You are breaking free. The test was never meant to define your worth. It was only ever meant to reveal it. And you, brave soul, are doing just that. You cert remembering. You cert choosing. You cert becoming. And that is everything. There comes a time, slowly without ceremony, when the questions you used to ask no longer matter the way they once did. You stop asking why things happened the way they did. You stop needing every answer to be wrapped in reason. You stop turning your pain over and over in search of someone to blame. Instead, something inside you whispers, softly but with strength, it was all part of it. And for the first time, maybe ever, you believe it. Not because it makes sense in your mind, but because it brings stillness to your heart. This is the point in the test where surrender begins. Not the giving up kind, but the giving in kind. The kind where resistance dissolves into awareness, where the fight ends and the presence begins. You realize you don't need to be right. You don't need to be certain. You only need to be here. And being here, in this exact breath, in this version of you, becomes enough. But surrender isn't set instant. It doesn't arrive all at once with clarity and peace tied in a bow. It arrives in layers, soft, slow waves that come to wash away what no longer belongs. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion, your body finally saying no more after years of overextension. Sometimes it looks like tears that fall without a clear reason, only that something deep is loosening. Sometimes it looks like sitting on the floor, with nothing left to fix, feeling the weight of your life press gently into your skin, and realizing you are still somehow okay. That moment, that breath between collapse and calm, that's where the test quietly steps forward. Not to interrogate you, not to push you, but to observe. It wants to see what you'll do when you stop performing, when you stop trying to prove, when you stop trying to shape yourself into a version you think others will love. And what it sees, what it notices most, is who you are when no one's watching. The way you still speak kindly to yourself, even when you falter. The way you still try to bring peace to others, even when you're tired. The way you pause before reacting. The way you choose truth over comfort. The way you return to your breath like it's an altar. The test pays attention to the small things, because the small things reveal your frequency. And your frequency reveals your remembering. You begin to notice how you feel after certain choices, not just the immediate outcome, but the residue they leave behind. Some decisions feel hollow, even when they make sense. Others feel full, even if they scare you. You start following the feeling, trusting the texture of your energy more than the noise of logic. And that's how the remembering deepens, not through knowledge, but through embodiment. The more you live from this place, the more you start to feel something ancient reawakening inside you. It's hard to name, harder to describe, but it feels like being held by something vast and familiar. Like walking into a space you've never seen before, but somehow already know, like hearing a melody your soul wrote long before you were born. That familiarity. It sits not a mistake. It's your past lives echoing into your present. It's your eternal self brushing up against your temporary form. It's your remembering crossing the veil. And in this space between the seen and unseen, the known and the unknowable, you begin to understand something that changes everything. You begin to feel that you are not just here to learn. You are also here to teach, not by lecturing, not by instructing, but by being. Every time you live your truth with softness, every time you let your heart lead, every time you choose love when fear would be easier, you become a lighthouse for someone still lost in the fog. You don't have to save them. You only have to shine. The test, it responds to light. Not brightness, not performance, but soul light, the quiet glow of someone who has come home to themselves. And as your light steadies, the questions begin to shift. You stop asking what's wrong with me and begin asking what am I being shown. You stop asking why is this happening to me and begin asking how is this shaping me. You stop asking how do I get back to who I was and begin asking who am I becoming now. These questions don't need immediate answers. They only need space. And you learn to hold space, not just for others, but for yourself. You become your own sanctuary, your own still point, your own soft landing. And in that, you start to radiate something unshakable. You shall still be human. You still feel doubt, still forget, still fall into old patterns when you're tired or scared. But you return faster. Until remember sooner. You'll forgive more easily. Not because you're perfect, but because you understand now that perfection was never the goal. Only presence. Presence. Over and over, until it becomes your home. The world around you might not understand. Some will resist your changes. Some will try to pull you back into the roles they're comfortable with. That sips. Okay. Let them. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to remember, to soften, to become. And not everyone will walk with you the entire way. Some will exit your life quietly. Others will leave with noise. And others will evolve with you, step for step, breath for breath, their remembering harmonizing with yours. Cherish them, because these soul companions, these fellow rememberers, are rare. You'll know them not by their words, but by how your nervous system settles around them, by the way their presence feels like truth, by how time stretches when you're with them. They are not distractions from the path. They are part of it. Mirrors, messengers, co-creators of meaning in a world that often forgets how sacred everything is. And speaking of sacred, you start to see the sacred in places you never thought to look. in washing dishes, in folding clothes, in waiting in line, in the ordinary rhythms of life that once felt dull. Now they feel like doorways. You realize the sacred isn't in the mountaintop moments. It's in the breath between heartbeats, in the warmth of sunlight through a window, in the silence that stretches just a little longer than expected. You begin to live in rhythm with life itself, not always smoothly, not without stumbles, but with awareness. You catch yourself when you drift. You return when you forget. You love even when you don't know how it will be received. And that love, it changes everything. Because love, when given freely, becomes a kind of light the test can't ignore. It bends reality. It softens time. It reshapes outcomes. And most importantly, it returns you to yourself. The test was always about love. Not romantic love. Not conditional love. But the kind of love that says, I see you. I accept you. I will stay with you through the fog, through the fear, through the remembering. And now you're learning to offer that love to yourself, to be the one who stays, to be the one who returns, to be the one who says, even if no one else sees me right now, I do. And in doing that, you pass something important, not a grade, but a threshold, the threshold between forgetting and becoming, between seeking and resting, between performing and being, and on the other side is peace. Not the kind sold by the world, but the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that comes from knowing you are exactly where you need to be in this moment with this breath, taking the next step in a test that has always loved you, even when it was silent. You are not late. You are not lost. You are remembering, perfectly gently, completely. There's something that happens when you've been walking the path long enough, when you've sat in the quiet and allowed the noise to fade, when you've faced enough of yourself to know there's no going back. You can still remember the life you lived before the shift, before the questions, before the unraveling, but it feels like another version of you, like a memory from someone else's dream. The world looks the same, and yet nothing feels the same. Not because the world changed, but because you did. And when your perception shifts, the entire fabric of reality begins to stretch and fold in new ways. You start to notice things you would have missed before. The tone of someone's voice says more than the words they're using. The tension in your chest speaks louder than your thoughts. The pull of your body away from a room, an energy, a situation, tells you more truth than 1,000 explanations. This kind of perception is not learned in school. It doesn't come from reading or research or theory. It comes from presence, from living in your own skin long enough to hear its quiet signals, and finally listening. You stop second-guessing your intuition. You stop explaining your energy. You start trusting your no, even when it disappoints others, even when it costs you something visible, because you know now that what it protects is invisible and invaluable. This is when your integrity deepens, not as an external rule, but as a soul agreement. You stop pretending. You stop participating in things that feel hollow. You stop engaging in conversations that drain your spirit. You stop seeking approval from places that don't know how to love you. You don't do it to prove anything. You do it because your peace is too expensive to gamble with anymore. The test sees this shift, not in your actions, but in your energy. It's not that you never doubt again, but that the doubt no longer drives. It's not that fear disappears, but that you stop letting fear speak on behalf of your future. And slowly, without needing to name it, you become something rare. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer, grounded, settled into yourself in a way that others can feel. Your presence begins to change rooms, not because you're trying to change anything, but because you're not hiding anymore. You not performing. You're not adjusting your frequency to make others comfortable. You simply being, and that being radiates something unmistakable. People may not understand what Sep's changed. They may say you've become distant or soft or strange, but you won't feel the need to defend it. You'll recognize the voice of your past self in their confusion, and you'll meet it with compassion. Because you remember what it felt like to live in a smaller version of yourself, to make choices from fear, to cling to certainty, like it was safety. And you'll realize you've outgrown that version, not with judgment, but with love. The test honors that kind of growth, the growth that happens in silence, the evolution that leaves no trail but changes everything. It meets your clarity with more invitations. It starts showing you pathways you couldn't see before, not because they weren't there, but because you weren't ready to walk them. And now you are. But readiness doesn't mean ease. It means willingness. It means you understand what the path asks of you, and you say yes anyway. It means you set willing to feel more, not less. To stay longer, not run faster. To rest more deeply, not resist the stillness. You begin to see that growth isn't about becoming something new, but about allowing who you already are to come through. You realize that healing isn't about fixing a broken thing, but releasing the belief that you were ever broken in the first place. You see that truth doesn't arrive as a conclusion, but as a lived frequency. And the more you align with that frequency, the more natural everything becomes. Not easier, but more coherent, more resonant, more true. You still have moments of forgetting. That's part of the spiral. The test doesn't move in straight lines. It circles back again and again, not to punish, but to deepen. You'll be invited to revisit old wounds, not because you failed to heal them, but because now you can meet them with new eyes, with a heart that's stronger, softer, more whole. And this time, you don't collapse. You don't spiral. You hold yourself differently. You witness. You breathe. You stay. And in staying, something unspoken shifts. This is how trust builds, not just in the world, but in yourself. The kind of trust that says no matter what comes, I will not abandon myself again. I will not betray my knowing. I will not shrink to fit a space that was never meant to hold me. I will not apologize for how deeply I feel. I will not measure my value by how easy I am to digest. I will not wait for others to understand before I honor my truth. This is where self-love becomes more than a phrase. It becomes a practice, a presence, a remembering. You remember that your softness is not a liability. It's your superpower. You remember that your boundaries are not walls. They are invitations to meet you in truth. You remember that your body is not a project. It's a compass. You remember that your emotions are not problems. They are guides. And in all of this remembering, you return to the you that chose to be here, to the you that agreed to forget, just so you could remember again, to the you that knew, even through the fog, that there was something more. And now you feel it. Not all the time, not in every moment, but often enough to keep going, often enough to trust the next step, even when you can't see the full path, often enough to open your heart again, even when it still aches, often enough to believe that this life, this strange, beautiful, painful, magical life, is not just random chaos, but a sacred curriculum. The test is not about winning. It sets not a ladder. It sets not a race. It sets a mirror. And now you see more clearly what it's reflecting. It sets reflecting your becoming, your remembering, your choice to stay awake. You've walked far, and there's farther still to go. But tonight, in this still moment, you can rest in the knowing that you are no longer sleepwalking through your own story. You are living it, feeling it, choosing it. One breath, one truth, one moment at a time. The deeper you move into the remembering, the more you start to understand that life, this whole experience, is not linear. It's not built on straight lines or clean beginnings and endings. It doesn't follow a map you can trace with your finger or measure with logic. Instead, it unfolds in spirals, in loops and layers, in seasons and cycles that rise and fall like tides. And just when you think you've arrived somewhere, just when you think you've finally figured it out, something soft and strange reminds you, no, you're not done, not yet. There's still more to feel, more to let go, more to remember. That's the nature of the test. It never truly ends because it isn't meant to. It's not the kind of test that leads to a final grade or a fixed result. It's a living mirror, always reflecting where you are in the journey, not to judge you, but to invite you deeper, softer, clearer. And the longer you walk this path, the more you realize that every new layer of growth doesn't make things simpler. It just makes them truer. There's a point where you begin to look at your challenges differently, not as obstacles to be overcome, but as thresholds. Each one, a doorway, a liminal space, a chance to die to an old version of yourself and be reborn into something more whole. And death in this context is not an end. It's such a surrender, a shedding, a sacred release of what you no longer are. And the process, though often uncomfortable, is what allows you to become more honest, more human, more aligned with the quiet current of who you truly are, beneath all the noise. You'll know you're at one of these thresholds when the discomfort feels familiar but heavier, when your usual strategies no longer work, when something inside you says, this again, and not with frustration, but with recognition. Because it is again, but it sits not the same. You sip circled back, but with more awareness, more depth, more courage. And that means you're ready to meet it differently this time. Not to fix it, not to escape it, but to feel it, to witness it, to stand inside the storm without running, and let it wash something clean in you. These moments, they don't always look dramatic on the outside. Sometimes they happen while washing dishes, sometimes while staring at the ceiling, sometimes while listening to a song you've heard 100 times but suddenly hear differently. Something opens in you. Something drops. And in that drop, the truth comes through, not as a thought, but as a knowing. A deep cellular remembering that you were never meant to hold so tightly, never meant to control so much, never meant to carry so many identities that no longer fit. You start to see how much of your life was built around survival, how many choices were shaped by fear, how many masks you wore because it felt safer to be liked than to be real. And when you see it, not with shame but with gentleness, you begin the slow work of releasing it. Not all at once, not in a grand gesture, but breath by breath, story by story, layer by layer. You let go of the pressure to always be doing. You stop defining your worth by how much you produce. You no longer see rest as laziness or boundaries as selfishness. You begin to understand that your energy is sacred. Your presence is sacred. Your existence, exactly as it is enough. And from this place, life begins to feel different. Not easier, not without pain, but somehow lighter. Because you said no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer chasing a version of happiness that was never yours to begin with. You're no longer looking outside of yourself for proof that you belong. You start to root down. You start to listen deeper. You start to realize that your own body holds the answers you've been searching for. There sits wisdom in your fatigue. There sits clarity in your longing. There sits truth in your discomfort. And when you listen to these messengers instead of overriding them, you begin to heal, not by force, but by relationship. You start relating to your pain differently. You start holding space for your fear. You begin treating your sadness not as a problem, but as a companion. And in doing so, you become safe for yourself. That's one of the quietest, most powerful parts of the test, to become a safe space for your own becoming. To no longer abandon yourself at the first sign of discomfort. To stay, to hold, to breathe through the storm instead of bracing against it. And it's in those moments, those shaky, vulnerable, raw moments, that the deepest remembering happens. You remember that you are not broken. You remember that you don't need to be fixed. You remember that everything you feel has a place. You remember that softness is strength. You remember that stillness is movement. And most of all, you remember that you are not alone. Even in your solitude, even in your silence, even in your most hidden moments, there is something witnessing you. Something ancient. Something vast. Something that has been with you long before you had a name, and will remain with you long after this chapter ends. Call it soul. Call it source. Call it memory. Call it love. It doesn't matter what you name it, only that you feel it, even now, surrounding you like quiet light. You begin to sense that everything is alive. The trees, the sky, the space between you and the walls. You feel the pulse of presence in places where you used to feel nothing. You start speaking to your life like it's listening. And maybe it is. Maybe it always has been. You realize that reality responds to the frequency you hold, not the words you speak, but the energy you embody. You no longer chase outcomes. You align your energy. And then you trust. You trust the flow. You trust the waiting. You trust the not knowing. And that trust, it becomes a kind of power. Not the loud kind. The rooted kind. The kind that doesn't need to convince. The kind that simply is. And from that place, everything shifts. You find that you no longer need to explain your path. You no longer shrink your dreams. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You understand that your frequency will repel what's not meant for you and draw in what is. You don't take it personally when things leave. You don't hold on when something wants to go. You let life move, and you move with it. This is where life becomes dance, where the test becomes movement, where remembering becomes rhythm. You start to live in a way that honors the unseen. You make decisions based on how they feel in your body, not how they look on paper. You trust your expansions. You honor your contractions. You begin to create not from pressure, but from pleasure, from resonance, from truth. And in doing so, you begin to co-create with life. You stop trying to control every step. You let the mystery breathe. You understand that uncertainty isn't something to be feared, it's a doorway to magic, to miracles, to the mystery that made you. And here, now, as you settle into yourself, as you listen beneath the thoughts, as you allow your breath to deepen, you begin to feel what was always here. Stillness, presence, peace, not because the world changed, but because you did. Because you chose to stay, because you chose to feel, because you chose again and again to remember. There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but full, not hollow but alive. It comes in slowly, like fog curling around the edge of a morning lake, almost invisible at first until you realize it's everywhere, wrapping itself around everything, including you. It's not the silence of absence, not the silence of being ignored or left behind. No, this silence feels sacred. It's the silence that comes after you've let go of the noise, after the striving has quieted, after the endless pursuit of answers has paused, after you've stopped running from yourself. It's the kind of silence where you can finally hear the whispers that have been with you all along. And in this silence, something else begins to rise. Something you almost forgot or maybe never noticed. It sets not loud, not eager to be seen. It doesn't shout. It simply glows, softly, steadily. And the longer you sit with it, the more it begins to unfold in you, like a lantern being lit from the inside. This is the light of inner knowing, of truth not learned but remembered, the kind that doesn't ask for evidence, because it already is. You don't arrive at this light by reading the right books or following the right path, or achieving something remarkable. You arrive here by surrender, by softening, by choosing presence over performance, breath over reaction, stillness over control. And that choice, however small it might seem on the outside, is what begins to change everything. It starts with noticing how you feel when you're alone. Not lonely, but alone. Without distraction, without input, without an identity to manage. You notice the weight of your own breath, the quiet hum beneath your thoughts, the subtle shifts in your energy as different memories pass through. And you begin to realize you are not your thoughts. You are not your past. You are not the name they gave you, or the roles you've learned to play. You are the space that holds it all. You are the awareness behind the noise, the still point within the storm. And the more you settle into that space, the more everything begins to feel like part of the test. Not in a pressured, high-stakes kind of way, but in a quiet, meaningful, spiritual way. Like everything is a message. Everything is a reflection. Everything is part of the remembering. You start to feel how nothing is separate. How the way you speak to yourself echoes in how you speak to others. How the energy you bring into a room lingers long after the words are gone. How the small choices you make, what you consume, what you allow, what you ignore, shape your field more than you ever imagined. You see that the test is not about mastering the external world. It's about mastering your internal one. And that kind of mastery comes from devotion, not domination. Devotion is quiet. It shows up in the way you keep showing up, the way you keep choosing softness, the way you keep returning to yourself, even when it would be easier to numb, to hide, to harden. Devotion is the way you sit with your feelings instead of fleeing from them, the way you offer yourself grace when you slip, the way you stop needing every moment to make sense and start trusting the shape of things to come. This is the deeper layer of the test. Not just can you awaken, but can you stay awake? Can you keep your heart open when it wants to close? Can you keep listening when the answers don't come quickly? Can you keep walking even in the dark? Because the dark will come, not as punishment, but as part of the spiral. The darkness. It holds pieces of you that you left behind long ago when it wasn't safe to be whole. And so the test will lead you there, not to scare you, but to retrieve you, to help you remember the parts of yourself you've hidden, your anger, your fear, your grief, your desire, your brilliance. It invites you to bring them home, to hold them, not with shame, but with reverence. You start to understand that healing is not a destination. It's a way of being. It's the way you move through the world with more presence, more patience, more permission to be exactly who you are in each moment. And when that realization settles into your bones, the way you speak to yourself changes. You stop criticizing. You start conversing. You stop demanding. You start listening. You no longer try to dominate your feelings. You ask them questions. You learn from them. And they begin to trust you. And when your emotions trust you, they flow. Flow is what the test wants for you. Not ease without effort, but alignment without resistance. The kind of movement that arises naturally when you're no longer forcing life into a shape it wasn't meant to take. You don't hit push. You invite. You don't hit grasp. You receive. You don't hit chase. You attract, and life responds. The more you soften, the more it opens. The more you trust, the more it speaks. The more you surrender, the more you are guided. And that guidance, it won't let always be clear. It won't set always arrive with signs or symbols. Sometimes it will come through stillness, through the absence of answers, through the pause that asks you to stay with the unknown just a little longer. That space, that liminal space between what was and what will be, is sacred. It sits where your soul stretches. It sits where your trust is deepened. It's where the test gently waits to see, will you stay present when the path is invisible? And if you do, something miraculous happens. You begin to live without needing constant validation. You stop asking life to prove itself to you. You simply allow. You show up. You stay open. You let go of the need to be certain. And in doing so, you become free. Free from the pressure to be perfect. Free from the past that told you who to be. Free from the future you were trying to control. You are simply here. And being here, fully, truly, tenderly, is the most powerful thing you can do. Because in this presence, you become a vessel for something greater than thought. You become a channel for love, for peace, for truth. You don't need to shout it. You don't need to prove it. You just need to be it. Others will feel it. They may not understand it. They may not have the words for it. But they'll feel safe in your presence. They still feel seen without needing to explain. They'll feel the invitation to remember just by being around you. And that is how the remembering spreads. Not through lectures or arguments or grand declarations, but through frequency, through energy, through presence, through love. And now, as you rest in this moment, let yourself feel that love wrapping around you. Not just the kind you give to others, but the kind that returns to you when you stop resisting. The kind that lives in the spaces you thought were empty. The kind that rises when you are still. The kind that reminds you you were never alone. And you never will be. Sometimes, the real breakthroughs don't feel like fireworks. They don't arrive with the clarity of epiphanies or the triumph of revelation. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a deep exhale you didn't know you were holding, in the moment when you stop needing to have the last word, in the still space where you choose peace over being right. It's subtle, so subtle you might miss it, unless you're listening with your body instead of your mind. And when you do feel it, it sits not loud. It sets soft, gentle, like walking barefoot on familiar ground, like slipping into a rhythm that feels ancient and already known. This is how the deeper layers of the test unfold, not through striving but through presence, not through force but through softness. And once you reach this place, this quieter place where the remembering begins to deepen, you realize something fundamental, that the test was never about winning. It was never about passing in the way the world defines success. It was always about presence, about feeling, about allowing life to move through you without needing to control its direction. There's a kind of wisdom that grows only through softness. It's the kind that cannot be taught. It comes from lived experience, from moments that cracked you open and remade you from the inside, from learning how to hold your pain without turning it into armor, from knowing that vulnerability isn't a flaw, it's a bridge. And every time you choose to walk across that bridge, you open more space in your heart. At first, that openness can feel too exposed, too raw. But then you notice something else begins to move in. A kind of trust. Not the intellectual kind, but the kind that lives in your breath, in your spine, in the way you meet each moment with your whole self. You start to feel held by life, not in theory, but in practice. You begin to trust the timing, even when it doesn't match your plans. You begin to trust your body's signals, even when they contradict your mind. You begin to trust the pauses, the delays, the empty spaces that once felt like punishment, but now feel like invitation. And that trust, it becomes a kind of guide. You no longer need to make every decision from fear. You no longer need to hustle for your worth. You stop chasing validation from people who never saw the real you to begin with. You start honoring your own yes and your own no. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You understand that energy speaks louder than words ever could, and you allow that to be enough. This shift, this deepening, is not sudden. It's slow, like watching a season change. One leaf, one breeze, one soft letting go at a time. You find yourself in new rhythms. You wake up without the heaviness you used to carry. You move slower, but with more purpose. You say less, but with more meaning. You hold space for silence without rushing to fill it. And in that silence, you hear things you missed before. You hear the quiet longings of your soul, the ones that whispered beneath the noise for years. You hear the subtle voice of your intuition, the one you used to silence in favor of logic. You hear the rhythm of your own becoming, the soft pulse of your own truth rising to the surface. And when you follow that rhythm, even in small ways, life begins to meet you differently. You attract people who feel like home, not because they complete you, but because they remind you of your own wholeness. You stumble into conversations that answer questions you hadn't spoken out loud. You find yourself in places you didn't plan to be, yet somehow feel destined for. You begin to experience a kind of synchronicity that defies explanation, not because you're manifesting from a place of control, but because you're living in alignment with something deeper. The test recognizes alignment, not as perfection, but as coherence. When your actions match your values, when your words match your energy, when your choices match your truth, you create coherence. And coherence is a language the universe understands. It responds in kind, not always with ease, but with clarity. And that clarity gives you freedom. The freedom to stop pretending. The freedom to outgrow what you've outgrown. The freedom to choose love, even when it's not returned. The freedom to choose rest, even when the world glorifies exhaustion. The freedom to feel joy, not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer require it to be. This is not the freedom the world teaches you to want. It sits quieter, simpler, but it's also real, and it's earned not through striving, but through surrender. And surrender is its own kind of power. It starts not giving up. It sits, giving in to the rhythm of life, giving in to the truth that you are not in control of everything, but you are responsible for how you respond. And response, grounded, intentional response, is where your power lives. You start to notice that in every situation, no matter how chaotic, there's a pause, a breath, a space between stimulus and response. And in that space is choice. Not just what to say or do, but who to be, who you want to be in that moment, who you are choosing to become. And the test watches that choice, not to judge you, but to reflect back what you're ready to see. Each time you choose presence over reaction, you shift. Each time you choose love over fear, you rise. Each time you choose truth over comfort, you remember. And with each remembering, the veil gets thinner. You start to see the world through softer eyes, not less aware, but more compassionate. You start to feel the stories people carry, even when they're not speaking. You sense the fear behind the anger, the grief behind the distance, the longing behind the mask. You begin to meet others with more grace, not because they deserve it, but because you've learned to meet yourself that way. And that grace begins to heal more than you realize. You start to become a safe space, not just for others, but for life itself. And when life feels safe in you, it moves more freely. Ideas flow, relationships deepen, timing aligns. Not because you're in control, but because you've created the conditions for flow. You become a channel for healing, for wisdom, for truth. And the more you surrender to that flow, the more alive you feel. Even in the quiet moments, even in the waiting, even in the not knowing. You start to realize the test was never about getting somewhere. It was about becoming someone, not someone else, but the you beneath all the conditioning, the you who chose to be here, the you who agreed to forget, so that one day you could remember. And now you are. Not all at once, not without mess, but fully. gently, clearly. You start remembering who you are, and you're becoming who you were always meant to be. There's a moment, you may not even notice it when it first arrives, but it changes everything. It sits not dramatic. It sits not loud. It doesn't shake the sky or echo across timelines. It simply settles in, quietly, completely. It comes when you stop needing everything to make sense, when you stop needing life to follow the script you were given and start accepting things as they are, not in resignation, but in reverence. That moment, the one where you whisper, maybe this is exactly how it's meant to be, maybe I don't have to fight it anymore, is a sacred one. It's such not giving up. It's giving in to the shape of the now, to the reality of this breath, to the mystery that's been unfolding without your permission all along. And in that surrender, something begins to soften. The grip of resistance, the weight of old stories, the tension you didn't realize had wrapped itself around your ribs. You find yourself breathing a little deeper, not because the air changed, but because you did. Because your nervous system is no longer trying to protect you from a future that hasn't arrived. Because your thoughts aren't sprinting toward the next thing. Because your heart, for once, feels safe enough to just be here. This is the kind of shift the test waits for. It doesn't need your perfection. It doesn't ask for your performance. It only wants your presence. Your real, messy, unpolished presence. The kind that shows up without knowing what to say. The kind that stays when there's nothing left to fix. The kind that listens, not to respond, but to witness. You begin to realize that being with life, truly being with it, is one of the bravest things you'll ever do. Because life isn't tidy. It sets not clean lines and easy choices. It sets layered, complex, often contradictory. It asks you to hold opposites in the same breath, to grieve and be grateful, to laugh with a cracked heart, to hope while still hurting. And the test asks, can you allow that? Can you allow all of it? Can you stop trying to edit your experience into something more palatable and instead just feel it? Feeling becomes your superpower. Not feeling for the sake of control, but feeling for the sake of truth. You begin to notice how emotions move, not as enemies, but as energy, flowing, shifting, asking for space. When you give them space, they don't consume you. They pass through, and in that passing they leave gifts. Clarity, insight, compassion. You stop fearing sadness. You stop resisting anger. You begin to see them not as intrusions, but as invitations, each one a messenger carrying something you were meant to receive. And when you start to live this way, you stop avoiding the dark. Not because you like it, but because you know there sits treasure there. You know the shadows aren't trying to harm you. They're trying to remind you of what you abandoned when the light felt too far away. The parts of you that didn't feel safe to exist in the open. The feelings you buried to make others comfortable. The truths you silenced in order to belong. The test will bring those things back, not to torment you, but to ask, are you ready to integrate now? Are you ready to hold what was once too much? This integration, it doesn't happen through analysis. It happens through presence. Through slowing down enough to sit with the parts of you once tried to outrun. It's steps, not a quick process. It can be rushed. It requires patience, gentleness, a willingness to let discomfort be part of the healing. And when you do, when you sit with what hurts without needing to change it, something else shifts. You become whole, not because you fixed yourself, but because you stopped treating your brokenness like something that disqualified you from love. And that love, true love, the kind that doesn't demand you be anything other than exactly who you are, is what starts to rise. Not just love from others, love from within, love from yourself toward yourself. And that self-love is not cliché. It's not surface level. It's not about bubble baths or affirmations, though those have their place. It's about the way you talk to yourself when no one's listening, the way you hold yourself in the quiet, the way you honor your needs even when it's inconvenient. You realize you are not here to be perfect. You are here to be real, to be present, to be in relationship with the unfolding of your life, not controlling it, not editing it, but meeting it, moment by moment, breath by breath. And in this meeting, the remembering deepens. You begin to see that every person who's entered your life was a teacher, even the ones who hurt you, especially them. They showed you what needed healing. They mirrored the places you had abandoned yourself. They cracked you open, and in the opening something new began to grow. You stop needing to label people as good or bad. You start seeing that everyone is carrying something, that everyone is doing the best they can with what they know. And from that place, you forgive. Not to forget, not to condone, but to free yourself, to stop carrying the weight of resentment, to open space for peace. You realize peace isn't set passive. It's not about avoiding conflict or numbing your feelings. Peace is active. It sets, powerful. It's choosing to be anchored in your truth, even when the world around you is in chaos. It's set, choosing presence over panic. It's choosing to trust that you are exactly where you need to be, even when you don't understand why. And that trust, it becomes a kind of home, a place you can return to again and again, no matter what's happening around you. You learn to ground not in certainty, but in awareness, not in control, but in surrender, not in having all the answers, but in being willing to live the questions. And in that willingness, life opens. You begin to move differently, speak differently, listen differently. You begin to live, not from fear, but from alignment. And in alignment, the test becomes something else. Not a burden, not a punishment, but a sacred unfolding. You see, you were never here to prove anything. You were never meant to get it all right. You were only ever meant to remember. And now you are. Still becoming, still unfolding, still walking, but more awake than ever. And that is enough. There is a rhythm to life, a quiet, undulating pulse that's always been there, just beneath the noise, behind the urgency, underneath all the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and why we're here. Most of the time, we miss it. We move too fast, think too loud, fill every silence with something. But then suddenly, or slowly, we find ourselves still. A pause we didn't step plan. A breath we didn't expect to take. A crack in the ordinary where something timeless slips in. And in that space we hear it. The rhythm. The hum. The echo of something ancient reminding us. This life, this whole thing, it's not what we thought. It's not a test to pass, but a melody to feel. You begin to notice it more often, not just in sacred moments or spiritual practices, but in everyday things. The way the wind moves through the trees like it's speaking a language you forgot you knew, the way sunlight filters through a window and lands just so on the floor, the way a stranger's glance lingers longer than expected, and in that glance something unspoken is exchanged. You feel it, in your body, a pull toward presence, an invitation into now. And slowly, without trying, you start to live more from that space. Not all the time, not perfectly, but more often than before. The test isn't set asking for mastery. It never was. It's only asking if you're listening, if you're willing to stay open, if you're ready to see that the path is not somewhere you arrive, but something you carry with you everywhere you go. And when you begin to carry it consciously, everything changes. You stop waiting for permission to live the life that calls to you. You stop apologizing for the things that make you feel alive. You stop making yourself smaller so others feel more comfortable. You expand not in arrogance, but in truth. quietly, naturally, like a flower turning toward the light without asking who's watching. And in that expansion, new parts of you begin to surface. Parts that had been waiting silently, patiently for you to slow down long enough to notice them. Your creativity, your curiosity, your capacity for joy. The parts of you that knew how to play, how to dream, how to imagine worlds that didn't yet exist. You begin to remember that wonder is not childish, it's sacred. That joy is not frivolous. It's medicine. That dreaming is not escape. It's sex creation. The test responds to this too. When you move in alignment with your joy, life begins to organize itself differently. Doors open that were previously invisible. People appear with timing too perfect to be coincidence. Challenges arise, but they don't feel like punishment anymore. They feel like refinement. Like the universe helping you sharpen your focus, clarify your yes, strengthen your no. You stop taking the setbacks personally. You stop making discomfort mean you've done something wrong. Instead, you listen. You ask softer questions. You trust that just because you can't see the path doesn't mean it isn't unfolding beneath your feet. And in this trust, something sacred begins to grow. A deep, unwavering inner peace. Not the peace of perfection. Not the peace of everything finally working out. But the peace that comes from knowing you don't have to carry it all. That you sit are allowed to rest. Heads that you're allowed to not know. That you're allowed to be held by something larger than your own willpower. And once you feel that, even for a moment, it's impossible to forget, you start to orient your life around it. Not as an escape, but as a compass. You make different choices, not because someone told you to, but because your body no longer tolerates what drains you. You stop abandoning yourself for love. You stop trading your peace for belonging. You start treating your nervous system as sacred ground, because it is. And in doing so, you become trustworthy to yourself. That's a deeper kind of safety than anything the external world can offer, because now you know how to return to your breath, to your truth, to your center. You know how to recognize when you're out of alignment, and instead of spiraling, you soften, you adjust, you choose again, and that choice, again and again, becomes your liberation. You sit no longer a prisoner of old stories. You stir no longer seduced by urgency. You stir no longer obsessed with outcomes. You stir here, fully, gently, willingly. And in that willingness, you become magnetic. Not in the way that attracts attention, but in the way that attracts resonance. You draw to you the people, places, experiences that match your frequency. Not because you're chasing them, but because you've become the kind of person who lives in integrity with what you desire. And that integrity becomes your new foundation. You no longer perform for love. You embody it. You no longer explain your worth. You express it. You no longer seek validation. You walk in your own truth. And the world feels different, because you start meeting it with different eyes. And what you see mirrors who you are. The test recognizes this too, not with applause, not with gold stars, but with deeper invitations to love more fully, to forgive more easily, to let go more gracefully, to trust more completely. And each time you say yes, each time you step into that higher version of yourself, the remembering expands. You sit not just healing yourself anymore. You steer healing the spaces around you. You're anchoring a frequency that others can feel, even if they don't know why. You're becoming a lighthouse in a world that forgot the way home. And you don't need to do anything special to shine. You only need to be, to breathe, to return, to remember. And now you are. There is a moment in the dark before dawn, a time when the air feels thicker with possibility, when everything is quiet enough that your own heartbeat seems loud in contrast, and you realize that you have been carrying within you more than you ever understood. The test has been unfolding in that silence all along, through broken nights, through hopes tucked away, through fears you weren't sure you could face. You may not see it yet, but you are standing on the threshold of something vast. Something not outside of you, but within. You are becoming. It begins with surrender, soft surrender, where you stop pushing against what hurts and start leaning into it. You stop trying to patch the world into your plans and instead allow the raw edges of your life to be what teaches you. Sometimes surrender looks like walking away from what no longer feeds your soul. Sometimes it looks like opening your heart even when it trembles. Sometimes it looks like simply being present with all that you are. Not less, not more, just present. It isn't set giving up. It's sex coming home. As you lean in, you begin to hear the whispers beneath your mind's chatter. You hear the long-forgotten song you used to hum beneath your breath. You remember laughter that felt like flying. You remember tears that baptized something true in you. You remember what it felt like before you learned to hide. And each of those memories is a stitch, something that sews your torn edges back together. The test doesn't offer you easy healing. It offers you truth. And truth isn't set always comfortable. It asks for tears. It asks for solitude. It asks for acceptance. It asks you to name what you've hidden: sadness, regret, longing, shame. It asks you to bring those parts forward, not to shame them, but to love them. Because when you lean into your scars, they become gateways not to suffering, but to strength. Not to shame, but to compassion. You begin to see that your past isn't a weight you bear. It is a teacher. The failures, the wrong turns, the losses, the betrayals, they all shaped you. They taught you boundaries. They taught you courage. They taught you what you cannot accept. And now, as you hold those lessons gently, they become part of your foundation, not chains that bind you. In the midst of this work, you also begin to heal your relationship to time. You stop wanting everything to be fixed by tomorrow. You stop believing that value lies in speed. You stop measuring your progress by external markers. You allow the flowering to happen in its own season. You learn patience, not waiting, but trust that the unfolding is never wasted. Every moment you showed up, every moment you felt, every moment you loved, even when it broke your heart, none of it was lost. It all carries forward. You start recognizing that cycles return to give you second chances, that life moves in loops so you can revisit old wounds with new awareness. You circle around certain lessons not because you failed them, but because you needed more depth, more softness, more love. And each time through, the remembering gets richer, more resonant. The loop becomes less painful, more sacred. You learn to embrace contrast, not to avoid pain by chasing only what feels good, but to see how darkness reveals the stars. You learn that grief does not disqualify joy, that longing does not erase love, that weakness does not negate strength, that vulnerability does not equal exposure, but sometimes the purest kind of bravery. There is an alchemy in your pain when you allow it to burn gently, when you allow it to transform rather than consume, when you no longer hide from the parts of you that hurt, but cradle them. When you realize that compassion starts with being compassionate toward yourself, you begin to see that the test is not about avoiding hurt. It's about learning to hold your own hand when the hurt comes, to speak to your own broken parts with tenderness, to lean into love when fear would be easier. And through that, you begin to cast light, not outward only, but inward. You begin to see what you once could not. You begin to see the beliefs you inherited that no longer serve you, the fears you whisper about at night, the dreams you suppressed, the ways you abandoned yourself for acceptance, the ways you dimmed your light so others could feel more comfortable, and you begin to say no to what dims you. You begin to make room for what honors you. In doing so, your life becomes less about survival and more about sacred expression. You stop shrinking to fit expectations. You stop silencing your own voice. You begin to trust that your softest truths are as powerful as your most confident declarations. You begin to shape your life, not from obligation, but from alignment. Not from fear, but from love. And in that alignment, the path becomes clearer, not easier, but more meaningful. You still be tested. The test will always bring you opportunities to lie, to soothe comfort over truth, to take the easy way. But now you begin to see those crossroads. You begin to recognize the invitation, and you begin to choose differently, not because you are perfect, but because you remember your promise to yourself. And each choice matters. Each moment where you choose presence over pretense ripples out farther than you know. You begin to see how your remembering becomes a gift, not only for you, but for everyone around you. The way you show up, the truth you speak, the love you offer becomes contagious. It becomes a pulse in the world that says, you can remember too. You can come home too. And that is strength that doesn't set shout. It just shines. Quietly, softly, reliably. And now, as your body rests in this quiet, as your breath slows, as the night holds you like a protective cloak, let yourself feel the magnitude of what you are doing. Let yourself feel the wonder of being alive in this moment. Let yourself feel how far you've come, even if you can't measure it. Let yourself rest in the truth that you are worthy, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. This moment, you letting yourself remember, is more powerful than you know. This breath, this soft, faithful inhale and exhale is sacred. You are weaving threads of your true story, the one that was written before forgetting. You are becoming more whole, more reflected, more real. The test doesn't stat end tonight. It doesn't promise peace without shadows. But you are changing. What was once unseen becomes visible in your heart. What was once hidden comes to light. What was once feared becomes accepted. What was once tear-filled becomes tenderness. You are remembering love. You are remembering strength. You are remembering truth. You are becoming gentler. You are becoming clearer. You are becoming more you. And that is enough. You wake one morning, or maybe in the middle of the night, and something feels shifted. The air feels different. The weight you used to carry seems lighter, or maybe your bones remember being lighter. You don't know exactly when, but the world you inhabit has begun to yield a little more space. Something inside you exhaled. Something inside you said yes to being seen. You realize you are no longer running so hard. You are no longer hiding in the corners of your own breath. You are beginning to live more in the center of who you are, even if only a little. The test is still there, but now it doesn't feel like an adversary. It feels like a guide. A quiet teacher who asks you softly who you will choose now. You begin to notice that your choices carry echoes. What you choose today, how you speak, how you rest, how you love, reverberates beyond the moment. It touches people you don't should see. It shapes energies you dumbest know. It bends the edges of what sips possible. And you understand now that nothing is actually small. Nothing is wasted. Every yes matters. Every no matters. Even the moments when you do neither. Just sit with what is. Just breathe. Those matter too. The test does not demand you always act. It sometimes asks you to still, to receive, to be held by silence. Because in the silence, truth often grows. You begin to trust your inner yes more. More often, you recognize when something feels aligned, not always because it's comfortable, but because there is a resonance in your chest, a calm in your bones, a lightness in your breath. And when you choose from that place, even when fear trembles beside you, you feel more whole, more honest, more yourself. It is unsettling at times because you will encounter resistance. Sometimes from inside, sometimes from outside, sometimes from people who still expect you to fit the old shape, sometimes from parts of yourself that fear change. But each time you step forward anyway, you affirm something deep. You affirm that you are here to become not perfect, but true. There are nights when the old stories still call you back. Nights when the mind loops with what ifs, should haves, not good enough. And they ache. They tug. They feel like weight. But the remembering that you've been building quietly, patiently, shows up. It reminds you that those stories are not the whole story. It reminds you that your worth isn't tied to perfection. It reminds you that you are already enough in this exact moment, even in your trembling, even in your doubt, even in your dark. And even when you forget that truth for a while, it remains, waiting, softly shining. You also begin to understand that love is more powerful than fear. Not because love always banishes fear. Sometimes fear lingers, but because love changes the field. Love alters the way you move through life. Love reshapes what you accept and what you refuse. Love asks for vulnerability, for openness, for risk. And those are the edges where growth lives. Love demands that you step into your own truth, whether it's well received or not. Because love isn't set, always safe. But love is always worth returning to. The test doesn't offer guarantees. It doesn't promise that love will be returned. It doesn't promise that all wounds will disappear. It doesn't promise that the world will become soft just because you have become soft. What it does promise is presence. It promises that attention matters, that how you show up matters, that your presence, steady, curious, kind, changes the scale of reality more than you realize, that your remembering matters, that your becoming matters. You begin to see beauty in places you used to bypass, in the way light filters through cracked windows, in the patterns shadows make on your walls, in the breath of someone you love, unguarded, in the silence after laughter, in the ache after farewell. You begin to live in those liminal edges, the in-between spaces that used to scare you because they felt undefined, but now feel sacred, because those edges are where life is most alive, where transformation whispers, where the boundary between forgetting and remembering becomes thinner. You begin to trust rest, not as reward, but as part of the journey. You understand that rest is not lazy. It is recalibration. It is restoration. It is how you refill the well so that when life calls, you have something to give. You understand that pushing too hard silences your truth. That exhaustion dulls your awareness. That rest is not an escape. It is a foundation. So you allow yourself to pause, to breathe, to do nothing, not out of guilt, but out of necessity. You allow yourself to lean into softness, into gentleness, into days when you are quiet, not because you must hide, but because you deserve gentleness. In this opening, you learn compassion, especially toward yourself. You see the parts of you that still believed the old lies that your worth depended on output, that your voice mattered only if it was loud, that to be loved you had to shrink. You see how hard you tried to adapt, to survive, to belong, and you forgive, not because you forgot, but because you're learning. Because forgiveness is not about saying it never hurt. It's about acknowledging it did and choosing not to carry the weight of bitterness. It's about freeing yourself. It's about untethering from the past enough to land more fully in this moment. You begin also to honor boundaries, not as walls but as clarity. You practice saying no when yes doesn't feel right. You practice speaking what you need, not out of anger, but out of alignment. You realize that protecting your energy is an act of love, not selfish but sacred, that you are chosen by your presence, and so you choose your environments, your relationships, your words accordingly. You become less willing to shrink, more willing to stand in your own space. And sometimes that will feel lonely. Sometimes that will require loss. But you trust that what is aligned will stay. What is meant for you will adjust to meet you where you are. And as you build this trust, your clarity sharpens. Not in sawtooth lines of white light, but in soft luminescence, in subtle knowing, in decisions that feel like home, in yeses that feel full, in noes that feel empowered. In your life you begin to move toward coherence, that place where your external life begins to reflect your internal truth, where your actions, words, beliefs, body align. And coherence does not always mean comfort, but it means being held by integrity, being held by truth, being held by the core of who you are becoming. You start to sense your own sacred rhythm, your pulse in the world. You feel how letting your own light shine encourages others. You see how your surrender, your vulnerability, your clarity become invitations, invitations to others to remember. You are not leading in the way the world expects. You are leading by simply being you. And that kind of leadership, quiet, embodied, soulful, has power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that transforms just by presence. That changes energy. That shifts possibilities. That seasons hearts. And now, as the night grows still around you, as your mind softens, as your body settles, know that this moment of remembering is part of your test. That every breath you take in alignment with your truth is a passing. That every time you choose gentleness when you could have defended hardness is a passing. That every time you let your heart be soft when the world demands armor, you are passing. Not once for all time, but over and over. And each passing matters. Each moment counts. Let yourself sink into the knowing that you are becoming more yourself with each dawn. Let your exhale release old burdens. Let your inhale remind you of love you were always meant to be. Let the rhythm of your life settle into peace, not because everything around you is perfect, but because your heart has found belonging within itself. You are not late. You are not behind. You are never forgotten. You are here, remembering, becoming, loving. Enough. You feel it, don't you? That subtle shift in your bones, that quiet opening behind your ribs, that long ago felt shut. After years of wondering where you belong, after nights that stretched uncomfortably with questions, after the ache of loss, the weight of what you couldn't change, the longing for more, now you're arriving at a threshold. Not an ending, but a cleft in the path where everything you've been learning, letting go of, surviving, is becoming the ground beneath you. You step forward slowly, yet with inevitability into a space that feels more real, more honest, more luminous. And everything you've carried, the regrets, the fears, the wounds, the hopes, folds into this new space, not to vanish, but to become integrated, woven, part of the tapestry of who you now are. There is no magic moment when everything becomes clear. There is no sudden epiphany that erases all shadows. But there are pieces of light that pierce the dark more sharply now, more frequently. You notice them in mornings that arrive with soft gold light, in the way certain people touch your life not by words but by just being present, in the way music makes your heart ache in a good way, as though that ache is recognition. You sense purpose, not as a heavy label you need to live up to, but as a whisper in your being, a simple knowing that your life matters because you matter. The test has always been asking not what you do, but who you are willing to become. And in these moments, you feel you're becoming more clearly. You feel that some part of you is waking up enough to accept responsibility, not out of duty, but out of love. Not because you have to, but because you want to. And choosing this path costs something. You leave behind illusions. You step out of roles that once gave you safety. You break free of the expectations that were never yours. Sometimes you lose friends. Sometimes the mirror you looked in no longer reflects what once did. Sometimes you grieve the versions of yourself you thought you were supposed to be. And in that grief, you almost think you might slip back into old stories, back into the comforts of being unseen, being small, being safe. But the remembering is stronger now. Your soul will not allow you to stay behind. You stand taller, not because you're trying to prove something, but because you recognize your own height. You recognize your own worth. You are no longer shrinking yourself to soothe others. You are no longer dimming your flame so that your existence doesn't disturb someone else's comfort. You are blazing quietly, kindled by something ancient, deep, the part of you that was here before the forgetting. What does it mean to fully embody this shift? It means your presence carries weight, not heaviness, not burden, but gravity of truth. People feel it. You become a node of peace in others' storms, not because you heal them, but because your peace is contagious. You speak less and listen more. When you speak, it carries tremor and depth. You no longer perform love, you allow love. You let life move through you. You let your vulnerabilities show. You let your boundaries be firm. You let your heart break and still stay open. And in staying open, even when the world is loud and painful, you shine, softly, steadily. You also settle into non-attachment, not to love, not to outcomes, not to the future as you imagine it. You understand that everything is temporary, the joys, the losses, even identity, and that the test is not about holding tight, but about letting flow. You honor what's here now rather than forever chasing what's not yet arrived. You stop sacrificing peace for promise. You stop gambling with integrity for perceived gain. You begin aligning with truth, even when truth asks for risk, even when truth asks for loss. Because you know now that nothing that's against your integrity is worth the cost of your soul. You begin to trust timing in a new way. You're still less frantic, less urgent. You know that the unfolding is not random, though it might be mysterious. You walk with faith in the hidden design, even if you can't see its thread. You breathe in the uncertainty, the unknowing, the gaps. You consider them part of the education, part of the test. You love without guarantee. You act without assurance. You hope without certainty. And this trust shapes a resilience deeper than any shield. In this place you recognize sacredness, in your body, in your breath, in your ordinary routines. You see that going to bed, waking up, making tea, walking, listening, resting, all these are rituals of remembering when touched by consciousness. You treat your body gently, because you know it carries your soul. You treat your breath with respect, because breath is your first and last teacher. You treat time as not just minutes passing, but as moments lived, as gifts, as soft treasures, even in suffering. You realize now that this test was never asking too much. It was asking you to be yourself, to reclaim who you were before the forgetting, to remember your origins, not as something to yearn for in sorrow, but as a foundation to live from, to integrate your shadows, to be love, presence, soft strength in every fractured place inside you. And as you do, the whispers inside become less of longing and more of homecoming. In the coming days or months or years or whatever seasons you move through, you may yet be tested in new ways. The world will call you back into old patterns. Doubts will creep in. Fear will knock at your doors. Loss might come unexpectedly again. But the difference now is you have seen more. You have rested more. You have remembered more. You have faith in the gentle power that runs in your veins, even in broken places. And so when you fall with grace. You rise with compassion. You hold the world with better hands. And in this final stretch before part 20, it helps to pause, to settle, to let your heart reflect. What have you learned? Who are you becoming? Which parts of you did you reclaim? Which parts do you still hold lightly? Which loves are you protecting? Which dreams are you nurturing? What legacy are you living now? Not for future fame, but for present truth. When you look back at all the pained nights, The lonely hours, the confusion, the resistance. You see a thread of love weaving itself through. You see that you never walked alone. You see that every choice of kindness, every act of courage, every moment you allowed yourself to feel, every time you chose presence, those built you. Let yourself lean into gratitude, not as obligation, but as recognition. Recognize yourself. Recognize the courage it took to stay. Recognize the love it took to open again. Recognize the strength in your vulnerability. Recognize the wisdom in your mistakes. Recognize the depth of your longing. Recognize the beauty of your becoming. And resting here now, feel the ground beneath you, solid, soft, real. Feel the breath moving through you. Feel your heart, the slow, patient drum. You are almost at the place where reflection ripples into peace, where remembering meets conclusion, where everything you've gathered in this test becomes part of how you live. Part 20 is near, and it will gather all these threads, your forgetting, your remembering, your loving, your becoming, and let you rest inside them. Tonight, as you lie still, as the world quiets around you, let all that has been stirred settle softly in your bones. The questions, the achings, the awakenings, the small victories, the moments of surrender, of grief, of love. Let them gather together in a quiet symphony inside your chest. You have walked far, wandered through shadows and light, learned what it means to forget and to remember, to break and to heal, to doubt and to trust. And now you come to a place of reflection, of integration, of peace. Everything that has shaped you, every loss, every heartbreak, every night you thought you might not make it through, has been part of the test. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. Even when you could not see the texture of your own life clearly, the threads were being woven. You were being prepared. You were being refined. You were being brought back to yourself. Not to the version the world expected you to be, but to the version that was waiting beneath the forgetting, beneath the noise, beneath the roles and costumes. In the early parts of this test, you may have believed that success meant control, that trust meant certainty, that love meant safety. But somewhere you realized those were illusions. Beautiful illusions perhaps, but not true rest. You saw that parts of you had been bending, hiding, performing, trying to earn belonging, trying to fill emptiness, trying to escape fear. And in that seeing, you began to choose differently. You began to let go. You began to choose presence over correctness, truth over comfort, softness over armor. You began to remember that being seen, being loved, being whole, do not depend on perfection. They depend on honesty, on surrender, on courage, on your willingness to trust the unseen. Let sets trace the path you have come. You came into the world agreeing, in some infinite place, to forget, to lose map, to lose certainty, to have your memories dimmed, to believe the stories that the world gave you, to live from the parts that others defined, to chase belonging, safety, acceptance. Then came longing, deep, raw, sometimes vague, sometimes sharp, a hunger for something you couldn't set name, a sense of missing that tugged at you in dreams, in sunlight, in someone else's laughter, in texture and color, in moments that felt like echoes. Then came awakening, small ones at first, flickers, moments where you paused, where you felt your breath, where you trembled, where you said yes to your own truth, where you honored your own yes and your own no, where you rested when rest was not offered, where you loved when it hurt, where you trusted when the ground beneath you felt slippery. Then came integration, the holding of your shadows, the letting yourself be soft, the standing in the dark, the embracing of your grief, the witnessing of your fear, the recognition that your wounds are not shame, but sites of power, the way your heart cracked open more fully so more light could enter, so more life could flow through. Then came alignment, a shifting of energy, a soft rearranging, a new way of moving through the world. Not as someone trying to earn love or impress or succeed, but someone being love, someone who holds truth in their bones, someone who knows that every breath matters, someone who sees beauty in ordinary things, someone who walks with less resistance, someone who listens deeply, someone who lets life move through them. This is your becoming. Now, here at the edge of what has been learned, there is peace, not because everything is resolved, but because you carry what you need. You carry knowing. You carry compassion. You carry presence. You carry love for yourself. You carry a gentle confidence in your capacity to return, always to your center. You carry gratitude for the lessons, for the heartbreaks, for the parts of you that refused to be silenced. And you carry hope, not a blind hope, but a rooted one. Hope born of remembering. Hope born of surviving. Hope born of loving despite everything. May this peace settle deep. May it rest in your bones. May it echo in your breath. May it shine in the small moments each day, when you choose kindness, when you choose truth, when you choose rest, when you choose love. These are your victories. These are your test passings, not measured by accolades, but by resonance, by integrity, by the pulse of your heart when no one else is listening. You do not need another test. You have taken this one with courage more times than you know. You have walked through darkness many times and returned. You have offered your light, even when it flickered. You have carried your own heart, sometimes tender, sometimes trembling, but always willing. That willingness, more than anything else, is your grace, your offering, your proof. So now let all that you are be seen, not in a spotlight, but in the soft glow of moonlight or candlelight or sunrise. Let your shadows lie alongside your light. Let your regrets rest, letting go not because you're done, but because you understand they were always part of the story. Let your longings soften into gratitude. Let your questions rest in the knowing that not all answers come in words. Let your fears melt in trust. Let your heart settle in this truth: you were never lost. You were simply learning to remember. And when the night deepens and sleep beckons, may you rest in the assurance that this life, this test, was never outside of love. That every moment, every pain, every joy, every heartbreak, every soft triumph was curated. That every breath you ever took in alignment with your truth mattered. That even when you thought you were alone, something within you was always holding on. Something ancient. Something unshakable. Something sacred. Close your eyes now, if you are ready. Let your breathing slow. Let your body sink. Let the last light of your waking awareness drift into dreams. And know when you wake again, whenever that may be, you carry remembrance, you carry presence, you carry love, you carry peace. You carry you, whole, gentle, luminous, brave. You have passed the test, not because you proved anything, but because you stayed, because you loved, because you remembered, because you became, because you continued, because you were always here. You are enough. You are whole. You are loved. Rest now. The test is complete, for now. Let your dreams cradle you in what you are remembering. Let your sleep deepen your integration. Let peace be your companion. You have done more than survive. You have awakened into your truth. And in that awakening, there is no more test. There is just love, just being, just you. Thank you for walking this journey with me. When you are ready, feel free to drift into silence and carry these words with you into your dreams.